Chapter 96. The night sky was cut into a small piece of black cloth by the eaves that were very close to each other. The stars were really bright today. It was as if a weaver had used gold thread to sew many small flowers onto a black cloth. It was very beautiful. This was the deepest side hall of the Li Palace, and also the place where Chen Chongqing resided. At this time, he was eating with Go Hanshi accompanying him. Qiushan Jun was left to guard Mount Li, and Qi Jian was not permitted to follow Zhixue north. Guan Feibai, Liang Banhu, and Bai Kai went to the front lines. Go Hanshi was left behind by him. After a very simple meal was over, Anhua and the priests placed the files that had just been delivered on the table in front of Chen Chongqing and Go Hanshi. There was no sound in the side hall, only the sound of flowing water. It was unknown where the green leaf had gone. After an unknown amount of time, Go Hanshi raised his head and rubbed his tired face. Anhua, who was standing at the side, offered him a scalding towel that she had prepared. Go Hanshi was slightly startled. After thanking him softly, he took the towel and wiped his face. Chen Chongqing also finished marking his papers, and Anhua hurriedly walked over. After a while, he and Go Hanshi began to converse softly, exchanging their opinions and analyzing these scrolls. Their opinions would be sent to the imperial palace in the shortest time possible for His Majesty to consider. At the same time, Star Taker Academy would also provide an opinion. His Majesty would discuss with the Prime Minister and the various ministers to come to a final conclusion. Everything in the Great Zhou dynasty revolved around this war. As for the ordinary affairs of the court and the people's livelihood, they were handed over to Mou. It had to be said that the emperor trusted Mou very much, and from the reactions of the imperial court in the last few days, she had not let down this trust and the Tianhai Divine Empress's teachings. This kind of life had been going on for a few days, but Go Hanshi still couldn't get used to it. For instance, why was the towel Anhua handed him so hot? Was her hand not afraid of blisters? He was a very meticulous person and had long ago noticed that Anhua's hand was truly uninjured. And why did the Li Palace receive reports from the front lines even faster than the army? The Li Palace would often learn of some important news the moment it happened on the front lines. Go Hanshi could not understand this. In comparison, the means of the devil race did not surprise him too much. The 7th report from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green has been sent back. It is confirmed that the hearts of the demon soldiers are swollen and congested, and are 1.5 times larger than normal. He said to Chen Chongqing, "Our calculations were correct. They used drugs to stimulate their power, but at the same time, they destroyed their rationality. They no longer had the instinct to fear death." Chen Chongqing said, "Is there an antidote?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he shook his head, knowing that he had asked a very stupid question. Even if the antidote could be found, there was no way to make the hundreds of thousands of low-level demon soldiers willingly eat it. If his and Go Hanshi's deductions were correct, the medicine used by the demons actually came from the human race. 10,000 years ago, the longevity sect had once used many Yao servants. It was said that there were some eccentric and extremely talented elders who liked to use these Yao servants to research the berserk transformation of the Yao race. It was unknown whether or not they managed to discover anything in the end, but they did create a medicine that could stimulate the potential of a living being and forcibly turn them berserk. The effects of this medicine were extremely fierce. Once used, the heart would explode and the user would die. There were no exceptions, so the longevity sect had very quickly sealed it into a forbidden area. The medicine used by the demons was very similar to the medicine of the longevity sect recorded in the Taoist canon. When they associated it with the fact that the longevity sect was secretly colluding with the demons, the truth was right before their eyes. Fortunately, the longevity sect had declined, and 20 years ago, they had been massacred by Su Li. The demons were never as numerous as us. Now 2 or 3 demon soldiers are enough to exchange for one of us. Chen Chongqing said, This sort of method feels too crazy and unreasonable. Go Hanshi replied, whether it's reasonable or not depends on the specific situation. Although the low-level demons are very important to the reproduction of the demon race, if too many of them die now, it will affect the future of the demon race in the long run. But right now, their first consideration is to survive. If they can scare us away, even if 4/5 of the low-level demons die, they might still be willing to accept it. Chen Chongqing fell silent. The situation described in the reports from the front lines truly was rather thorny. The war had just begun, but the demon race had already adopted the stance of a decisive battle. Although there were no experts dispatched, anyone would feel a little frightened at the thought of hundreds of thousands of demon race soldiers pouncing on their positions without any regard for their lives. Before the crazed and suicidal attacks of the demon soldiers, many human soldiers truly had crumbled. On some of the battlefields where the pressure was the greatest, there were even cases of soldiers fleeing in disorder. If Linghai Jiwang and the Orthodoxy cavalry had not just happened to pass by and killed more than 100 people, they might not have been able to suppress the demons. If the demons wanted to use this sort of method to scare the human army away, or at least dampen their morale, then they had to admit that they had succeeded. Liang Hongzhuang held this view, and so did Go Hanshi, though he thought a little further than Liang Hongzhuang. I don't know if this is the Demon Lord's plan or Black Robe's, but it's obvious that the other side's more important goal is to wear us down. Go Hanshi stood up and said, "He wants to wear down our courage, energy, and most importantly, time." A map condensed from clear light hung in the air. He used his finger to draw 3 lines on the map and said, "From the focus of the other side's attacks and the time it takes for them to shift, their goal is very clear. They want to use these 3 waves of attacks, to use these 30,000 some li of grassland and lives to buy enough time." The human army was already 17 days behind the original plan. If they continued to slow down like this, even if the human army could break through the demon defenses and reach Xuelao City, it would probably be late winter. That would be an unimaginably perilous situation. What should we do? Chen Chongqing asked. Go Hanshi thought for a while, then said, "Just follow the original plan." Confused, Chen Chongqing asked, "Just act as if nothing happened?" In reality, nothing really happened. We all know that the demons will resist at all costs. Go Hanshi continued, "On the contrary, in my view, whether this is the Demon Lord's or Black Robe's plan, they both made a grave mistake. There has been no war for many years, and at least half of our armies on the front lines have never stepped onto the battlefield. This time, the demon offensive is very urgent, so it can be used as a test, a tempering, to turn them into true veterans." Chen Chongqing said, "This sort of test and tempering is very difficult." Go Hanshi said, "If we can't even get through this barrier, how can we talk about attacking Xuelao City?" Chen Chongqing said, "Even if we can get through this barrier, there will be many unexpected losses. Yes, many people will die this time. It might be people we know, people we don't think should die so early." Go Hanshi looked at him and said, "But everyone will die. We will also go there, and we will also die, so please be calm." Chen Chongqing walked to the edge of the pool and gazed at the slowly spinning wooden ladle in the water. He thought of that pot of green leaf, thought of his martial uncle the Pope holding the green leaf and fighting a bitter battle with the divine Empress 10 some years ago in the ruined southern city. He sternly said, "I don't want to stay in the capital." "No." Go Hanshi did not hesitate. Chen Chongqing asked, "Since we will go sooner or later, why not go earlier?" Go Hanshi replied, "You are the Pope, so you must stay in the capital and calm the people. Only when we can see Xuelao City can you leave." The moment they could see Xuelao City would be the moment of the final battle. If Chen Chongqing left the capital at that time, his believers and people would not be worried about the state of the battle. Instead, they would be even more confident in their victory. This was an arrangement that had already been decided upon, Or perhaps it could be said that this was something that had already been discussed before the battle. When the human army attacked Xuelao City, Chen Chongqing would be present, not the emperor. The scrolls were carried away by the priests, and the opinions and plans were sent out of the Li Palace as quickly as possible to the imperial palace. Go Hanshi took the hot towel and Hua handed him, expressed his thanks, and then covered his face with it to slightly relieve his fatigue. When he opened his eyes, he realized that Chen Chongqing was no longer there. He suddenly heard the clatter of a sword. Go Hanshi went out of the stone room. Chen Chongqing quietly stood inside. There was no sword in the stone room. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Go Hanshi sensed the strangeness in his mood and asked, "What happened?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Liang Hongzhuang is dead." Go Hanshi's expression flickered. "Liang Hongzhuang?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Yes, someone I know." Chapter 97. Go Hanshi was quiet for a while, then said, "I know who he is." Liang Hongzhuang was Liang Wangsuan's younger brother, and he had another secret relationship with the Mount Li sword sect. He was a clansman of Liang Banhu and Liang Xiaoxiao. The two were silent. The stone room was very quiet. Just as they had discussed earlier, there might be unexpected losses this time. Some people who should not have died so early in their eyes had died. Liang Hongzhuang was this sort of person. He was an important member of the Liang household, and also a star condensation expert. The war had not even begun many days ago, and based on past events, it was far from reaching the most bitter stage, yet he had died. Chen Chongqing and Liang Hongzhuang had met 3 times and exchanged several dozen words. They could not be considered familiar, but they were still people he knew. He also knew many people on the battlefield. Tang 36, Linghai Jiwang, the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy, like Chu Wenbin and her. But Go Hanshi also knew many people. Guan Feibai, Liang Banhu by Kai, his martial uncles from the Sword Hall, his fellow Taoists from the south. "My apologies, you shouldn't be the one advising me," Chen Chongqing said to Go Hanshi. Go Hanshi replied, "You should have guessed that Yorong wanted me to say these words to you." Chen Chongqing gazed at the string of stone pearls on his wrist and said, "She could have said these words to me herself." The former governor of Xuanyang City, Feng Guijun, had once worried about whether they could endure a night of continuous demon attacks, whether they could see the morning light of the next day. As it turned out, his worries were unnecessary. His army had not been able to endure the first wave of attack. Just as night fell, those crazed demon soldiers broke through their defenses. The number of devil soldiers was just too great. When they saw the black tide on the plains under the starlight, he and all the other human soldiers inwardly groaned. Liang Hongzhuang did not groan, no fear on his face. He did not howl, nor did he sing a heroic song. He simply charged at the black tide. Reality also proved that brave people would always be rewarded with good fortune. Divine General Peng Shihai personally led the cavalry to successfully change the course of the battle, saving these soldiers who had bitterly held out for 2 days and 2 nights. Fierce battles were happening everywhere on the grassland. Most of the time, people were fighting for themselves. The fact that this place could be rescued naturally meant that there was an important person here. Although the imperial court had sent him to his death, the imperial court was not willing to see the governor of Xuanyang City die so early, let alone Liang Hongzhuang. The bonfire was lit again, illuminating the meadow. The demon soldiers had already lost their minds, so there was no need to worry about being ambushed. The surviving soldiers gathered around the bonfire, their faces covered in blood and water without any expression. More than a dozen white ceremonial robes fluttered on the meadow. They looked like beautiful white flowers and attracted many gazes. The teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green searched everywhere for the survivors, using medicine to provide timely treatment. Occasionally, they could even see the clear light of the sacred light technique. Unfortunately, in such a fierce war, it was hard to find too many wounded people. Dead bodies of human soldiers were everywhere on the meadow. In the end, no one found Liang Hongzhuang. When the former governor of Xuanyang City, Feng Guijun, was found, his body covered in blood and his expression particularly perplexed. In a daze, he was constantly muttering to himself, or there was no need, there was no need. No one understood what he was trying to say, nor did anyone know why he had become like this. Feng Guijun clearly remembered what had happened just now. Liang Hongzhuang raised his spear and charged at the black tide of demon soldiers, but was quickly drowned out. He, who had lived like a prince for so many years, truly was very afraid. He wanted nothing more than to turn and run, but his experience over the last few days told him that the demon soldiers had already become true beasts. There was no longer any reason to speak of. If he did not kill them all, they would continue to chase him. And he was still the governor of Xuanyang City. He had once been the governor of Xuanyang City. Now he was a general. With a roar, he led the surrounding soldiers and charged at the demon soldiers. He had basically forgotten what happened next. He only remembered that he was constantly swinging his blade, constantly falling, and then crawling back up. At the beginning, he could still feel the pain from his body, but later on, he couldn't even feel the pain anymore. He only felt that the blade in his hand was getting heavier and his breathing was getting heavier and heavier. Just when he was exhausted and wanted nothing more than to put aside everything and just fall asleep, he suddenly heard a distant voice in the darkness. Reinforcements had arrived. His mind roused, he used the last of his strength to charge towards the perimeter, but he sank into despair behind the meadow. Several dozen demon soldiers had just charged out of the darkness, their mouths dripping with stinking saliva and their eyes blood-red. Just when he believed that he and his bodyguards were doomed, he suddenly saw a person amongst the demon soldiers. Liang Hongzhuang stood up, leaning on his spear, on the verge of collapse. Feng Guijun wanted to tell Liang Hongzhuang to run, but he could not make a sound. Liang Hongzhuang did not run. He had chosen to self-detonate. The true essence in his ethereal palace and the 108 chi openings simultaneously erupted. A silver firework illuminated the meadow. The blazing and divine star radiance instantly tore apart the bodies of those demon soldiers. For cultivators, this was the most tragic way to die, the most painful farewell. There's no need, isn't it just death? It's not like I said I wasn't willing to die, so why make yourself feel so much pain? Feng Guijun absent-mindedly sat on the grass. General Feng? A woman dressed in white ceremonial robes walked up to him. The curtained hat covered her face, making her voice somewhat indiscernible. Feng Guijun ignored her. There was a flash of black light. Feng Guijun's palm was pierced by a small hairpin, leaving behind a delicate bloody hole. The perfect amount of pain finally brought him back to his senses, but it was not enough to make him scream. Still using the starlight, he did not see the tide of demon soldiers, but an incomparably beautiful face that also left him stunned. "Is it, milady?" Feng Guijun asked in a trembling voice, and then began to cry. Milady should have come to save him. The woman ignored him, indifferently saying, "Congratulations, you now have two choices. You have already been proven to be courageous in battle, and the crimes you once committed have already been redeemed. You can return to Xuanyang City. Of course, you can no longer serve as the city guard, but you can continue living as an ordinary citizen." Slightly perplexed, Feng Guijun asked, "The second is?" The woman replied, "You can stay. Once you recover from your wounds, you can follow the army north." Feng Guijun did not speak for a very long time. Anyone else would have known which of these two choices to choose. If it was an hour ago, he would have made a decision very easily. Now, he found it extremely difficult. He knew that she would not deceive him, because that was something that she disdained to do. "I choose the second choice." His voice trembled, clearly still fearful and uneasy. The woman was somewhat surprised. "Why?" Feng Guijun raised his head and earnestly asked, I hear that there's an opera in Xuelao City? The woman nodded. Feng Guijun said, I want to go there and hear just how different it is from the singing of the Jin clan of Luling and the Orange Water Zhang. Feng Guichuan and the heavily wounded that had already been discovered were sent to the southern camp to be treated. After recovering, they could choose to return to the army or go home. The teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green remained on the battlefield, continuing to search for the wounded and treat the soldiers. At certain times, the faint fragrance of herbs even masked the stench of blood and decay. But the most serene and peaceful was still the sacred light. The work of treating the wounded continued into the day. No matter how serious their wounds were, as long as they could find them, they could all be treated. Sometimes it was almost a miracle. The battle came to a pause. All the demon soldiers in 100 li radius had been cleanly killed. The vanguard reorganized itself, but strangely, besides the red falcons heading to the main camp, many red geese had also landed in the meadow, and in the afternoon, many fast horses were arriving. A piece of news gradually began to spread among the tens of thousands of soldiers. The Holy Maiden was on that meadow. Su Yorong walked toward the front of the meadow. Wherever she passed, the golden flames would burn the rotting corpses of the demon soldiers into smoke. Now that her identity had been exposed, there was naturally no need to conceal it. A gentle breeze blew away the smoke, restoring the meadow to its former brightness. Some cavalry were waiting in front of her. The two sides of the meadow were covered in kneeling soldiers. The wounded were also struggling to kneel, their faces brimming with piety and fortune. To be personally treated by the Holy Maiden, how many lifetimes was this fortune that could be cultivated? The cavalry that had come from all over represented the will of many divine generals, as well as some important personages of the capital. They were all emissaries that wanted to persuade Su Yorong to hurry back to the capital. The most important reason was naturally safety. Everyone knew that the Holy Maiden had the bloodline of the heavenly phoenix and was a true cultivation genius. Although young, she was already half a step from the divine. But this was a battlefield brimming with death and slaughter. Without the Pope at her side, one could not help but feel somewhat uneasy. Another important reason was that the South Stream Temple sword array was also not at her side. The disciples of South Stream Temple were also not in the southern camp, but in the even more distant and even more important Central Army tent, responsible for protecting the commander-in-chief of the northern expedition. The cavalry began to kneel, begging the Holy Maiden to return to the capital as soon as possible. Su Yorong did not even glance at them. She took a letter from the hands of a South Stream Temple disciple. This disciple had traveled day and night and was extremely exhausted. She sat down on the ground and began to meditate. From this, one could easily imagine the importance of this letter. This letter came from the Central Army tent, but it did not come from the commander-in-chief, nor did it have anything to do with the capital. It had been written by Yi Xiaoyan. The South Stream Temple sword array that guarded the Central Army tent was currently under her command. For this reason, she knew many secrets. Of course, one could not rule out the possibility that some important personage wanted to use her to accurately deliver information to Su Yorong. Many important personages, including the divine generals, had always known that the Holy Maiden was on the battlefield. In the bitter battles of the last few days, she had led the teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green to various battlefields, saving the lives of countless soldiers. Why was it that these important personages had not pointed it out in the past few days, but now stood up and used the name of safety to implore her to return to the capital? The explanation Yi Xiaoyan gave in the letter was that Su Yorong had saved too many wounded people on the meadow today. To save so many heavily injured people on the verge of death, one could not rely solely on the sacred light technique. The Holy Maiden had assuredly used that medicine. In the last few days, she had probably also used that medicine, but she had not used too much, so everyone could still endure it. Today, she had used too much medicine, so everyone was truly unable to endure it, so they wanted to ask her to leave. In truth, everyone believed that the authority to distribute this medicine should not have been in her hand. The holy maiden was benevolent and loved the people of the world, willing to pay any price to save anyone who was injured. But if that medicine was used up on ordinary soldiers, what would happen if a divine general was injured in the future? What would happen if a prince died? This sounded very callous, but this was a battlefield, a war. The distribution of any resource had to have rules. Life and death were fated, but there was definitely a weight to it. There had been no war in the last few years, so the Lee Palace had removed the monthly distribution of cinnabar pills. One only needed to make a simple calculation to know how many cinnabar pills they had accumulated. The authority to distribute the cinnabar pills was in the hands of the Lee Palace, but when it came to the specifics, they still had to consult the generals on the front lines. In times of peace, the combined will of the powerful personages represented by these cavalry would not have been able to shake her in the slightest. But this was a time of war, and the status of the army was rising. Moreover, the intentions of the generals were reasonable from a certain point of view, and they had given her sufficient respect. So what sort of answer would she give? Su Yorong slowly took off her veil hat, revealing her perfect face. The surrounding plains grew even quieter. Only the nearby disciples of South Stream Temple could see the exhaustion on her face. She turned to those cavalry. A cool breeze rustled the long grass of the plains, creating a sound like waves. Chapter 98. In the very beginning, Liang Hongzhuang was killed by the 9th Demon General. Later on, when I wrote it, I realized that I liked him and respected him, including when he was pursuing Su Li. Thus, I wanted him to leave more cleanly, so I changed it to this style of dying for the country. I will make some changes to the previous sentence. It truly was wrong. I apologize. Su Yorong silently gazed at the small bottle in her hand. She still had some of these bottles, not in her sleeve, but in the tong bao. Countless gazes fell on her hand, some fanatical, some nervous, and some uneasy. Everyone had guessed. This small bottle contained the legendary cinnabar pill. It was also the most important reason why all the generals had bitterly begged Su Yorong to return to the capital. These pills are Chen Chongqing's, so what's his is mine. Su Yorong turned to the kneeling cavalry and said, I know that many of you are unconvinced, but do not let me know, because it will make me unhappy. The bodies of the cavalry stiffened, as they understood the meaning in her calm tone. Unspoken words were important messages that did not need to be spoken to be heard. She was replying to the entire world. If she was unhappy, perhaps the world would no longer have any cinnabar pills. The cavalrymen bowed in the most respectful manner and left as quickly as they could, spreading her orders throughout the grassland. The South Stream Temple girl looked at her, hesitating to speak. Was it better to return? Su Yorong's body and mind were both very powerful, but she was still rather tired. But she would not leave. Only here could she see the immediate changes on the battlefield, the truest situation. At the same time, the people of the capital could see the truest situation. The current situation was very complicated, and this could be seen from the selection of the commander-in-chief. Su Shiji, who had been recommended by many, upon receiving her letter, had shut himself in his estate, feigning illness and refusing. Pring Shihai and the other divine generals of Qin Guansong's faction currently occupied half of the great Zhou army, but if one wanted to choose a commander-in-chief from among them, one would inevitably encounter the fierce opposition of the Western army system represented by Shui He. Moreover, it would be very difficult to obtain the approval of the Li Palace. A candidate close to the orthodoxy would also find it impossible to obtain the support of the ministers of the court and the princes of the Chun clan. Everyone thought about it, and finally cast their sights on a place that had been forgotten by many for a long time, the divine general of the East's estate. Right now, Su Shiji seemed to be the most acceptable candidate for the various forces. However, very quickly, the Su estate received a letter from the Holy Maiden Peak. From then on, the gates of the Su estate were tightly shut. Su Shiji, on the other hand, insisted on refusing due to illness. People understood that this was the Holy Maiden's intention, so they naturally did not force her. The final selection of the commander-in-chief was very unexpected. When the imperial edict was passed down to all the counties, many people had not even heard of that name. Divine General He Ming was once the commander of the Black Armored Cavalry. He was very low-key and could even be said to be a nobody. But he had sufficient seniority and was Chen Guansong's junior brother, yet he did not have a close relationship with Peng Shihai and the other officers of the Star Caesar Academy. Moreover, in the Battle of the Orthodox Academy 10 years ago, he had led the black-armored heavy cavalry to a halt outside the collapsed Mount Mo. His performance had been extremely mature and steady, simultaneously winning the admiration of the Emperor and the Pope. In other words, the most important reason why he could be the commander-in-chief was that all parties could accept him, and he didn't belong to any party. The problem was that this also meant that he wasn't Chen Chongqing's man, nor was he the Emperor's man. No matter how mature and steady a person was, when they held great authority, they could still have other thoughts. On the bitter battlefield, when one's blood was stimulated, one's ambition would often grow with it. Thus, Su Yorong would not leave this place. The shadow of death finally left the plains. Perhaps it was because that drug that stimulated one's potential and erased reason was gone, or perhaps it was because the large number of low-level demons had died that even Xuelao City found it somewhat unbearable. In short, on a certain day in the early summer, the human armies no longer saw those blood-eyed, beast-like demon soldiers charging. As the demon armies retreated, they would occasionally see some sporadic battles. It was clear that these demon soldiers had not taken that drug. Although they were still rather stupid, they were no longer as daring as they had been a few days ago to charge into the ballistae, much less fearless of death. The plains were covered in blood of different colors. When this blood dried, it would turn into large patches of color. From a distance, it looked like a painting. He Ming gazed at the painting on the plains and recalled the words of the bishop he had invited from the Li Palace when he and Chen Guansong were studying the history of demon culture at Star Caesar Academy. The demons are just this sort of strange species. The low-class demons are no different from beasts, but the high-class demons possess an unimaginable sense of beauty. Moreover, the two classes are not completely isolated from each other. There is a close relationship between them, and they influence each other. Thus, in the paintings of Xuelao City, there are often large and crude blocks of color. If the nobles of Xuelao City really could order around the low-level demons like monsters, this war would become even crueler. If the demi-humans were still the slaves of the demons, there would be no chance of victory in this war. This was all thanks to Emperor Taizong's wise decision. As he looked in the direction of the capital, Divine General He Ming felt a similar emotion for the Pope. The initial stages of this war had been exceptionally bitter, far surpassing the calculations made before the war had begun. From a certain perspective, this was a clash of resources, resolve, and wills built up over 1,000 years between the human and demon races. This clash ultimately rested on two kinds of medicine. The demons had used the poison developed by the longevity sect. Based on the quantity, Xuelao City had actually been preparing for this war for many years. On the human side, the cinnabar pills that Pope Chen Chongqing had accumulated for 10 years had basically all been used up. At this point, the war had reached its second phase. The human armies continued to advance north, following the direction in which the demon armies had been routed. They broke through two defense lines and allowed the plains to be completely in the hands of the humans. The temperature gradually rose as the summer approached. It really was the height of summer, but the plains were wide and the mountain range that stretched for several thousand li had many openings. Wind blew through them, but the army did not find the heat unbearable. In the early morning they could even feel a little chilly. One morning, a rapidly moving red dot suddenly appeared in the gloomy sky, dragging a red line behind it. It was probably a red eagle. The moment the red eagle flew over the peak of the mountain, 2 vigilant sentries noticed it and blew a warning horn. A group of cavalry galloped out of the camp, perhaps to ensure the safety of the intelligence report or to receive someone. That red eagle had probably discovered the enemy on the other side of the mountain. Logically speaking, the majestic mountain several dozen li away had already been searched many times and should not have any ambushes, but this was still the territory of the demons. Who knew what strange tricks they had up their sleeves? The red eagle was still extremely fast and did not seem tired. Not long after flying over the precipitous cliff, it suddenly dropped to the ground. Just what was in that cliff? A figure suddenly appeared from a pile of rubble, rushing like a bolt of lightning into the plains and toward the human camp. This was a disciple of the 10,000 Years Pavilion famed for his swift movement technique. He was assigned the most dangerous position at the front. When the 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple was still several li from the camp, he suddenly grunted and crashed to the ground. Crossbow bolts. A furious and shrill yell rose from the camp, followed by the twang of bowstrings. Several hundred crossbow bolts, imbued with a divine radiance, tore through the gloomy morning light and landed behind the 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple. They covered an area of several dozen zhang in radius, leaving behind densely packed holes in the ground through which smoke rose. The human army was already very experienced. Those demon soldiers skilled in pursuit would often emerge from the ground. Soon, the cavalry arrived in front of the 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple. The 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple's leg was covered in blood, clearly broken. But he did not care, only yelling, "There are demons in the mountain! I can't determine which tribe they belong to, but there are many of them." The cavalry grabbed him onto their horses and returned to the camp. No one noticed that 3 cavalrymen continued to gallop towards the mountain in the distance. No one knew what they were going to do. The morning had not yet awoken, and the cliffs facing the human army were very gloomy. The voices of demon soldiers suddenly came from the cliffs, but it was impossible to see where they were coming from. They had clearly searched the area many times, so why had they failed to find any traces of these demons? Several dozen small caves were located in the middle of the cliff. Let alone the demon soldiers, not even the thin human soldiers would be able to squeeze in. When they had first searched the area, they had believed these caves to be bird caves, so they had not paid them much attention. No one had expected that the enemy was hiding in these bird caves. Because the enemy was either demon soldiers or birds. They were a kind of black-gray vulture. Several thousand vultures surged out of these small caves and then flapped their wings into the sky. It was clear that these vultures had been trained, perhaps even directly controlled. They appeared to be extremely orderly. Even when they flew into the sky, they did not disperse. The 3 cavalrymen were still some distance from the mountain. Seeing the activity in the sky, they were rather confused. Even if these vultures had been trained to attack targets on the ground, it was still too much of a fantasy to think that they could rely on their sharp vulture claws to cause damage to the human camp. At this moment, the first ray of morning light pierced through a crack in the mountain and shone on the grassland. The sudden light caused a vulture to panic and loosen its claws. A black object dropped down. With a boom, the grassland in front of the cliff burst into flames. The 3 cavalrymen glanced at each other, seeing the shock in each other's eyes. But they did not slow down, speeding up toward the mountain. Chapter 99. The fiery light in front of the mountain had similarly raised the alarm of the camp. The soldiers awoke from their sleep, took up their weapons, and began to run to their positions. The array masters completed the preparations to activate the array as quickly as possible, and the 800 crossbowmen formed a crossbow array at the very front of the camp. This was the North Third Camp, under the command of Divine General Peng Shihai. He gazed at the several thousand vultures that covered the sky, his expression still indifferent, his voice not trembling in the slightest as he methodically issued tensome military orders. Only the personal guards standing at his side noticed that their commander's fists were tightly clenched, his knuckles rather white. It was not fear, but anger and anxiety. If every vulture was carrying a weapon similar to gunpowder, what sort of trial would the North Third Camp face today? The array set up by the array masters could cover half the camp, but it would not be able to hold out for too long before such a fire. As for the crossbow array, it should be able to shoot down a group of vultures, but based on the altitude at which the vultures were currently flying, by the time the crossbow bolts could reach them, they would already be flying over the camp. Thus, what difference did it make whether they threw down the gunpowder or were shot down? If only Master was here! A cavalryman who was climbing up the cliff shouted. Another cavalryman shook his head and said, "Even if Master was here, he might not be able to kill all these birds." The third cavalryman said nothing, his body exuding a cold chi and a soaring killing intent. In his view, the North Third Camp would assuredly become a sea of fire. Even if the array could resist for a few moments, it would still suffer grievous losses, and the fastest wolf cavalry of the demon race might be waiting in the north to attack. In other words, there was no way to reverse this defeat. Thus, he had to at least kill the commanders of those vultures and prevent such defeats from occurring in the future. To be able to climb such a steep cliff and think like this, he and the other two cavalrymen were naturally no ordinary soldiers. But even though they were powerful cultivators, there were still many things on the battlefield that could not be changed. Suddenly, a shrill cry resounded through the sky. The three cavalrymen subconsciously stopped and turned to look in the direction of the human camp, where they saw a completely unexpected sight. Rays of green light spread out from the grassland that was illuminated by the morning sun, eventually forming a formation that enveloped the first half of the military camp. Even at such a distance, he could still see the flickering light of the sacred light crossbows. The human army was ready for battle. However, those vultures did not even reach the top of the camp before they all fell to the ground. There seemed to be an invisible and mysterious power in the world, appearing in front of the vultures, causing them to panic and feel powerless to flap their wings. Thousands of vultures fell to the ground like raindrops, turning into flames that soared into the sky as they landed on the grassland. The scene was incomparably spectacular. "What's going on?" one of the cavalrymen shouted in pleasant surprise. The cavalryman with a cold aura shouted, "Speed up!" Seeing that the camp was safe and sound, the three cavalrymen's spirits were lifted. They rushed towards the caves in the middle of the cliff, their speed as fast as flying swans. When they arrived in front of the caves, the three sensed the cold chi seeping out from within and knew that the demon freak was still inside. Without any delay, their swords whistled out of their sheaths, shooting into the caves like cold rays of light, moving with unimaginable speed. At first, there was no sound from the cliff, but then there was a muffled thud, followed by the incessant sounds of cutting, mixed with cries of pain and curses in the language of the demons. Eventually, the demon freak began to repeat a certain phrase, seeming particularly panicked and terrified. After an unknown amount of time, the sound in the cliff finally disappeared. 3 cold swords flew out of the caves and returned to their sheaths. The morning sun was higher than before, its light shining on the mountain to the side and then reflecting off the cliff, illuminating the faces of the 3 cavalrymen. One face was calm and serene, one face was firm and cold, and one face was youthful and lively. They were Liang Banhu, Guan Feibai, and Bai Kai. Bai Kai curiously asked, "What was that demon freak shouting before he died?" Liang Banhu and Guan Feibai glanced at each other and laughed. Guan Feibai's smile faded as he sternly said, "Eldest brother told you to learn the language of the demons, so why didn't you listen?" Bai Kai aggrievedly said, "There are more than 100 kinds of demon languages, so how could I learn them all?" Cries of alarm could be heard all over the plains, because the same thing was happening in all the camp. The demons had not mobilized a large number of soldiers to counterattack, but had launched countless sneak attacks at the same time. This sort of sneak attack was more accurate to describe it as a surprise attack. The demons had used all sorts of strange techniques and had dispatched many experts. This was the first time since the start of the war that the demons had sent experts into battle. But just like in the first phase of the campaign, once they moved, they attacked with all their strength, leaving no room for retreat. The demons had more than 3,000 tribes, of which no less than 100 possessed powerful fighting strength. Today, the leaders of these tribes and their strongest warriors were either bursting out of the ground or flying down from the cliffs, their faces savage. A beast tamer from a remote lake commanded a monster to launch a suicidal attack. A wandering warrior from the slums of Shuelao City, who had failed in his ambitions threw off the hide covering his body, took up his heavy demon axe, and leapt out of the monster horde. The targets of these experts were extremely clear, and they had been specifically targeted: the provisions, array masters, and commanders of the human army. Several hundred small-scale battles began simultaneously on the plains. Although they did not have much effect on the overall situation of the battle, they succeeded in creating a massive chaos. Behind the chaos was often a clear and callous intention. As the sun rose over the horizon, its light refracted by the mountains and plains, making the world even darker. The demons' true intentions seemed to have finally become clear. Several hundred demon experts exuding a somber chi, concealed by an array intent that could disrupt the workings of the heavens, arrived less than 20 li from the human army's tent. The battle intent that could disrupt the workings of the heavens caused the clouds in the sky to gather once more. Drops of rain began to fall, falling on the faces and lips of the soldiers, making them feel rather light and empty. This was the power of a law. Had an expert of the divine domain arrived? The commander-in-chief, Divine General He Ming, was a low-key and composed man, but in certain aspects, he was extremely adventurous, even radical. The Central Army tent had been pushed to the very front, only 100-some li from that mountain called Mount Nuoralang. At this crucial moment, there was no need to hold anything back. The human experts had finally moved. The pure white and blazing holy light illuminated the dark and gloomy world. It tore apart those cotton-like flowing clouds and revealed a corner of the blue sky. Mao Chuyu and Huai Ren walked out of the Central Army tent. With a wave of their sleeves, they killed 10-some demon experts. No one was surprised by this. Even those demon experts who had come to their deaths had long ago predicted their fate. How could the most important Central Army tent not have an expert of the divine domain standing guard? Since the demons had long ago predicted this, they had naturally made corresponding preparations. The sky suddenly dimmed. The deep blue had disappeared, and a black, broken chessboard was faintly discernible in the faint fog. At the base of Mount Nuoralang, a pitch-black path had suddenly appeared in the empty grassland. The edge of this path was not even, like a piece of paper that had been casually torn apart. This description was actually very appropriate, because it was originally a passage torn out of space by the demon race's terrifying grand array. Several demon generals, leading several thousand wolf cavalry, surged out of the valley from several hundred li away and galloped toward the Central Army tent. The clouds gradually thickened, obscuring the sun. The darkness seemed to come early, and several particularly tall figures appeared in the darkness. They were probably members of the Council of Elders or some of the nobles of Shuelao City. Mao Chuyu and Huai Ren's expressions did not change, remaining very calm. Since the demons had predicted that they would be here, they could naturally guess that the demons had made corresponding arrangements. Late last night, they had already seen the possibility of that path appearing on their fated star plate. Up until now, nothing new or unexpected had occurred. Suddenly, Huai Ren's eyes turned solemn. Mao Chuyu's sleeves began to move. An extremely large black silhouette suddenly appeared on the summit of Mount Nuoralang. Unlike the demon generals and the wolf cavalry, this black silhouette had not appeared through the path in the valley, but on the summit. The sky was growing gloomy, but the wind had dispersed much of the fog in front of the mountain, revealing the true appearance of this massive black silhouette. This was an extremely rare mountain-toppling fiend from ancient times. It had a long snout and coiled horns and was extremely vicious. It was 40-some zhang tall. On the coiled horns of the mountain-toppling fiend sat a very thin and small demon, not even the size of a human child. It wore a suit of armor, and the armor was covered in complex designs woven from golden threads. Many dark green objects were embedded in the armor, some of which were emeralds, others copper that had been corroded by time. An unimaginably terrifying chi seeped out from the chink in the armor, but it was far less cruel and evil than this demon's gaze. When this demon appeared on the summit, the world for several hundred li around it seemed to fall silent for a moment. Because it was the demon commander. After an extremely short period of silence, howls and shouts of killing could be heard. The several thousand wolf cavalry madly charged at the central army tent. Because the demon commander had arrived. It was obvious that if they wanted to defend the central army tent today, they had to defeat, or at least block, the demon commander. When the old demon lord was still alive, he had been the undisputed second-ranked expert of the snowy plains of the land of demons. Now that the old demon lord was dead, could it be said that he was the strongest expert of the demon race? No one knew the answer to this question, because Mountain Man Yenji had secluded himself from the world, and because Black Robe had still not used his full strength. But there was at least one fact that could be confirmed. The demon commander was no ordinary expert of the divine domain. If Chen Chongqing were here, he might have recalled that Su Li had used the word abnormal when he mentioned the demon commander by the hot spring. If even Su Li found it abnormal, one could imagine just how cruel and powerful the demon commander was. Mao Chuyu was well aware that he was no match for the demon commander, and Huai Ren had only been a divine domain expert for an even shorter time, so who could stop him? A sword glow came from the south. That sword light was clear and serene, just like real water. This sword glow washed away the haze in the sky and drowned out the howls of the grassland. It seemed leisurely, but it was actually murderous as it slashed at the summit. A plume of black smoke suddenly rose from the charging wolf cavalry. The 8th demon general flew through the air, treasure in hand as he attacked the sword glow. The sword glow seemed like a reflection on the water in the corridor. With a slight tremble, it circled around the 8th demon general. With a light swish, a clear sword slash appeared on the 8th demon general's armor, lines of fire flowing through it like lava. The unbearable pain caused this demon general famed for his perseverance to let out a furious roar. With this furious roar, a plume of black smoke rose from the wolf cavalry, but its momentum was far greater than before. Demon Chi soared into the sky, forcefully stopping the sword glow. The sword glow would occasionally flash, illuminating the black smoke, and the occasional sound of metal breaking could be heard. The 3rd demon general finally managed to block this sword glow. His helmet was covered in slashes and a small part of his demon horn had been broken off, demon blood gushing out. It was just a single sword glow, but it had required 2 high-ranking demon generals to act one after the other to block it, and they had been in such a sorry state, even injured. It was different from Su Li's sharpness and freedom, and also different from Chen Chongqing's directness and unswerving determination. This sword was even more serene, even gentler, yet it did not lose its sharpness. It was completely traceless, impossible to grasp, and extremely profound. On the side of the camp was a tent used to store miscellaneous items. An old Taoist walked out from within. He held a sword in his right hand and a sheath in his left. Whether it was the way he walked or the way he held the sword, there was nothing beautiful about it, and it had nothing to do with the word otherworldly. But anyone with a discerning eye could see that this sword was no ordinary object. It was like the autumn water that had been washed for 3,000 years, so bright that it was impossible to look at it directly. It seemed as if it wanted to obscure the world before everyone's eyes, including the heavens and earth. Could this be the legendary heaven-shrouding sword? Could this ordinary old Taoist be the sect master of the Mountly Sword sect? The officers and soldiers in the camp were shocked speechless, and one by one, they opened a path. Mao Chuyu and Huairen slightly bowed. Chapter 100. The two demon generals on the plains, the demon elder of even higher cultivation, and the Duke of Shuilao City all had abnormally grave expressions. The remnants of the sword intent drifted to the summit of Mount Nuoralang. The demon commander grabbed at the air and brought it to her nose to sniff, feeling a little wary. The Mountly sect master had broken through 10 some years ago, but he had not received much attention. In the view of many people, this old Taoist, who had never left the sect, had only relied on the supreme techniques of the Mountly Sword sect and several hundred years of bitter cultivation to barely break into the divine domain. He truly didn't count for much. Who could have imagined that his cultivation in the path of the sword was so astonishing that he had already walked on the second threshold? Mao Chiyu looked at the Mountly sect master and said, "I will have to trouble sir today." The Mountly sect master glanced at Mount Nuoralang and waved his hand. "I can't beat this villain." Without waiting for Mao Chiyu to speak, he pointed at the two demon generals on the plains and said, "These two can't beat me, so let me." Mao Chiyu and Huairen were taken aback, thinking, how magnanimous are these words, and also thinking, who will deal with the demon commander? There was no time to think. The fog in the dark path was getting thicker and thicker, and those tall figures were getting clearer and clearer. The demon elders and the Duke of Shuilao City had already descended onto the battlefield. If they were not stopped, the central army tent would suffer a direct attack. In the breeze, Huairen went to meet the Duke in his fluttering robe. Mao Chiyu, on the other hand, waved his sleeves and went to block the member of the Council of Elders. The Mountly sect master held his sword in his right hand and the sheath in his left. Stepping on a rainbow light, he charged at the two demon generals. The experts of the divine domain appeared one after another, their powerful chis clashing against each other, stirring up gales and dust. A sword glow tore apart everything in the world, followed by a ray of heavenly light that illuminated the plains. Demon chi as thick as the darkness gushed out of the valley, devouring the sword glow like a true dragon from the abyss. The heavens turned upside down and the earth went dark. Countless unimaginable miraculous scenes played out in the sky and on the earth. Some of the mountain peaks near Nuoralang were completely flattened, golden blood dripping down from the sky, igniting in the wind and emitting boundless heat and holy light. Meanwhile, the blood of the demon experts was like ink, painting the sky even darker. In that short period of time, it felt like countless days and nights had passed. The human army on the plains relied on the barrier of the array to barely hold on against the shockwaves produced by the collisions of the divine domain experts. Occasionally, the experts of the army and their crossbows would try to help the human divine domain experts, but they were unable to break free from the harassment of the wolf cavalry. The demon commander remained on the sidelines, her cold and cruel gaze piercing through her helmet towards a certain place in the south, waiting for someone. About 100 miles to the west was the most dangerous right camp of the Western Army. No one had expected that the most important personage of the Western Army, the Prince of Xiang, would not remain in the rear, nor would he pay any attention to the people of the Tsong Province Army headquarters. The streams of light in front of Mount Nuoralang could be seen clearly in the sky. Even though they were more than 100 li away, they seemed to be right in front of their eyes. The Prince of Xiang's hands rested on the fat dripping down from his belt as he squinted at the sword glows and demon chi, his thoughts inscrutable. If he had set off at the start of the battle, he should have been able to participate in this rare chaotic battle between the sanctuary powerhouses. But he did not do this. He believed that it was still far from the most crucial moment. The most crucial thing was that not everyone had arrived. Yes, just like the demon commander, he was also waiting for a person to arrive. "He's here. He's here." Cries of joy rose from the rear of the central army tent. These cries were like sparks thrown into boiling oil, quickly spreading throughout the entire camp and the entire battlefield. Whether it was the human soldiers or the wolf cavalry on the perimeter, they all heard this distant voice. He had arrived. That person had finally arrived. The winds howled. The gravel slapped against the blades of grass, making a pitter-patter sound. A person appeared before everyone, dressed in a cloth gown that had been washed so many times that it had turned white. His face was unpresentable, and he looked like an accountant who owed a great deal of money. Wangpa had arrived. No one knew where he had been a moment ago. No one knew where he had come from. This was not the Central Army tent. He was not in the habit of standing at the commander-in-chief's side. This was not the storeroom. He had no interest in playing games. He walked over from the south. To the south was the world of the human race. His shoulders were drooping as usual, making it easy for him to grasp the hilt of his saber. The grassland was in chaos, desperate battles of life and death taking place everywhere. Shouts and cries of pain rose and fell, and the winds and sand obscured the eyes of many people. In such a vast and complicated scene, Wangpa was just a very inconspicuous dot. No one should have noticed him. But when he walked over from the south, everyone, including the soldiers and experts of the devil race, saw him. No matter how wretched his clothes were, how ordinary his demeanor, how dazzling the world he resided in, he still possessed the strongest sense of existence. The demon commander, however, closed her eyes. The temperature on the summit suddenly plummeted, and the black rocks were covered in a thin layer of white frost. Against an opponent like Wangpa, even she had to be cautious and use all her strength. Wangpa did not seem to move very quickly, as if he were walking at a normal pace, but he very quickly passed through the human camp and arrived on the battlefield. The situation on the battlefield was abnormally complex. Unexpected situations could occur at any time, bringing many variables and dangers. But Wangpa did not quicken his pace, nor did he change his direction. He continued to calmly walk. The demon commander closed her eyes to gather energy, to prepare for their encounter later on. That was assuredly a heaven-shaking thunderous strike. Wangpa was no stranger to this. Back in Tanja Temple on the outskirts of the capital, he had sat under that ginkgo tree for 10 some days and nights, his blade never unsheathed. He was comprehending the path of the blade, and he was also gathering energy. It was only because of this that he had been able to kill Tai Shu with a single strike of his blade on the banks of the Luo River. At this moment, he was walking towards the mountain peak. This process was also accumulating power. The ranking of demon generals was similar to that of the divine generals of the Great Show. Seniority and reputation were taken into consideration, but the most important factor was absolute strength. Syndicate was currently the third-ranked demon general of the demon race, possessing an extremely powerful cultivation. None of the divine generals of the Great Zhou were a match for him, and coupled with the fact that he was deeply trusted by the young demon lord and had been granted a few powerful demon artifacts, he could be considered a true expert of the divine domain in terms of fighting strength. Just now, that sword glow had shaved off a small portion of his demon horn and caused him to bleed and be in such a sorry state, besides the profound nature of the Mountly sect master's attack, was also because he had somewhat underestimated his foe. Moreover, he had not expected the sword in this old Taoist's hand to be so terrifyingly sharp. This injury had made him much more clear-headed and cautious. Together with the 8th Demon General and a few other experts of the military, he fought with the Mountly sect master, appearing very composed. He saw Wangpa walking across the battlefield, but he found it impossible to escape the envelopment of the Mountly sect master's sword intent. With a fierce howl, he ordered the wolf cavalry to attack Wangpa. At the same time, he indicated with his eyes that the 8th Demon General should work with him, bringing the entire force to the center of the battlefield. No matter how frightening those wolf cavalry were, they could not injure Wangpa. The 3rd Demon General understood this point. He only hoped that he could interrupt Wang Po's gathering energy. In a battle between Wang Po and the demon commander, even the tiniest influence could directly alter the course of the battle. The Mountly sect master guessed at this demon general's intentions. His long brows fluttered as he lightly flicked his finger. The heaven-shrouding sword had just shattered the third demon artifact, leaving the eighth demon general covered in blood. Suddenly, it encountered that gust of wind and gave off a crisp hum. The sword hum was extremely clear and cold, spreading over the entire plain. Several seemingly ordinary soldiers walked out from the chaotic battlefield and came to Wang Po's side. The wolf cavalry began to charge. The bloodthirsty wolves' eyes were filled with madness while the demon cavalry let out unpleasant howls. Several awe-inspiring sword intents soared into the sky and slashed at them. Those ordinary soldiers were actually elders of Mount Li's Sword Hall. Cold swords flashed as the wolf cavalry dropped to the ground, blood splashing everywhere. Several Sword Hall elders walked at Wang Po's side like bodyguards. No matter which side the wolf cavalry charged from, they would cut them down. They wanted to ensure that Wang Po would not be disturbed in any way. Even if this would affect their swords, even if it would injure them. Before the battle with the demon commander began, Wang Po should have done nothing. In the view of many people, this was the only way to look at the overall situation. But Wang Po had never been a person who could calmly accept the good intentions of others. If he did that, how could his blade be as powerful as it was today? On the western side of the plain, Huai Run was currently battling with that member of the Demon Council of Elders. The elegant and austere finger energy pierced through the air like an arrow, shattering dozens of Yuan Qi locks and leaving deep bloody holes on the demon race Grand Elder's body. The world-stream divine finger truly was no small matter, especially when used by a divine domain expert. The demon elder gave a harsh howl as he snatched the scepters of the two tribal leaders and sucked in the souls attached to them, instantly healing his injuries. Not only that, his demon body began to visibly grow larger. He was now 10 zhang tall and, cloaked in the darkness, he seemed like a demon god. At this moment, a clear metallic cry came from the distance. It was the sound of metal scraping against each other. The blade was about to be unsheathed. The demon elder's expression suddenly changed. Confirming that he had no time to dodge, he let out a strange cry of despair and fell like a mountain toward Huairen. The blade intent that seemed to come from beyond the heavens cut a hole in the darkness. With several crisp sounds, several wounds appeared on the demon elder's shoulder. The light from the heavens shone on the horsetail whisk, white as silk, and gathered into a cloud that bombarded the demon elder's chest. The demon race's grand elder suddenly shattered, turning into black powder that filled the sky. The wild grass within a radius of several li withered upon touching it. Huai Ren's face was pale and blood trickled down from the corner of her lips. She turned to the center of the battlefield. Wang Po was walking toward the mountain, as if he had done nothing at all. Many gazes fell on his body. His hand was already gripping the sheath. His thumb was pressed against the lower edge of the hilt. A section of the metal blade was exposed. Chapter 101. Nuoralang Peak. The demon commander sat on the mountain-toppling fiend's coiled horn, her eyes closed as if she had fallen asleep. In addition to the green patina in the cracks of the armor, there was also a lot of frost. His aura had been raised to its peak state, and even the mountain was expressing its submission. Of course, he was not asleep. He was listening to the movements in the grassland. He heard the swords of Mount Li, heard the sleeves of the Li Palace, heard the slender fingers of South Stream Temple, but he remained unmoved. Then, he heard the sound of an iron saber being unsheathed, and he suddenly opened his eyes. He's actually so confident? Many years ago, not far from Xuelao City, Black Robe had organized an assassination plot against Su Li. At the most crucial moment, Chen Chongsheng emerged from the garden of Zhou and delivered the yellow paper umbrella into Su Li's hands. Su Li gripped the hilt of his sword, and the demon generals several dozen li away were heavily injured. Su Li pulled out half of his sword and black robe retreated in defeat. Today, Wang Po already had some of Su Li's elegance, even though he did not directly attack. However, just as the demon commander was puzzled, the one who had died was a divine domain expert, so Wang Po should have expended a lot of energy. Was he not afraid that it would affect the upcoming battle? There was a tear in the front of Xiao Chen's robe. When the wind blew, it made it difficult for him to walk. The moment the saber intent appeared, the tear was cut off, and he flew far away like a kite with its string cut. Wang Po thought of Xiao Zhang and thought to himself, I wonder where that bad-tempered fellow is right now. I can only hope that he won't go to Shuilao City alone. He looked at the other side of the grassland. That was another battlefield. The Mountly sect master waved his sleeve. I don't need it here. Separated by Tensum Li, his voice clearly resounded in front of Wang Po. Wang Po nodded in acknowledgement and continued walking forward. The 3rd and 8th demon generals suddenly put away their weapons and retreated a distance. 3 pitch-black magic artifacts exuding a gloomy and cold aura fluttered in the sky above them, monitoring the surroundings. The Mountly sect master was slightly taken aback. His white eyebrows rose as he also retreated some distance. At the same time, the human cavalry and wolf cavalry retreated to the sides. There were 2 bloodthirsty wolves that were too stimulated by the smell of blood and refused to obey the order to leave. As a result, they were beheaded by the demon cavalry without hesitation. A path appeared in the middle of the grassland that was several miles wide. From the grassland to the peak of Nuoralang, the passageway was empty. There was nothing in it. It was extremely quiet. Elsewhere, the battle was still raging. The silence here was especially strange. The demon commander opened his eyes, indicating that he was ready. Wang Po's blade was also ready to be unsheathed. At this point in time, the battle could no longer be interrupted, nor could it be disturbed. The demon commander was the strongest of the demon race. This was already a publicly acknowledged fact in the snowy plains of the demon region. Wang Po's seniority couldn't compare to that of other divine domain experts, but he was indisputably the commanding general of the human race. In a sense, the battle between them represented the war between humans and demons. Such a battle should be respected. This also meant that no one could lose. Wang Po gazed at the mountains several dozen li away. Mount Nuoralang was black in color, but now its head was white. In a short period of time, a thick layer of snow had accumulated on the peak. This was the manifestation of the demon commander's fighting spirit, cold and insufferably arrogant. There was a trail of footprints on the grassland behind Wang Po. That was his path. Just like his saber Dao, it was extremely straight. Wang Po vanished. When he reappeared, he was Tensum Li away in the sky. The demon commander was not waiting for him on the peak. The mountain-toppling fiend gave a pained howl. Its nostrils spewed out a hot mist while its descending feet left Tensum spiderweb cracks in the rock of the mountain. The snow madly danced. The demon marshal jumped into the sky, and with a flip of her hands, a saber appeared in her hands. It was a massive scimitar. The blade was bright, but its edge was black condensed from the darkness of the night. No one could have expected that the true weapon of such a short creature was this scimitar. It was more than 3 times its height. The demon commander descended from the sky, both hands gripping the scimitar as it slashed at Wang Po. Wang Po pulled out the scimitar, straightened it with his forearm, and slashed at it just as he had slashed at the Luo River. Boom! There was a massive explosion. The darkness spreading out of the valley suddenly began to sway like a tangible black cloth, like an inky ocean. Thousands of plumes of dust rose from the cliffs and plains. Within a radius of several hundred kilometers, both human and demon soldiers covered their ears with their hands, their faces contorted in pain. Even though their eyes were red with killing intent, they were forced to temporarily halt their attack. The 200-some wolf cavalry closest to it were directly jolted to death, not even having the time to scream. The demon commander was jolted back to the summit of Mount Nuoralang, accurately sitting on the horn of the mountain-toppling fiend. After rolling 700 some times in the sky, its face was rather pale, but it was somewhat obscured by the helmet and the complicated patterns of its jewels. Wang Po landed on the plains, 10 some bottomless cracks extending from his feet into the distance. Ha 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 ha. A series of unpleasant and hoarse laughter came from the demon commander's helmet. This laughter was particularly arrogant and tyrannical, making it seem like one could see the savage smile on its face. Everyone says that you are a peerless genius of the human race, but today it seems that you are only SOSO. Wang Po said nothing. The hand holding the blade was trembling. There was a deep cut on the edge of the iron knife. Just who had lost? Had Wang Po lost? The demon commander's laughter suddenly came to a halt. There was a muffled squelch. This sound was like a street performer of the capital spewing oil. Countless streams of blood flowed out from the cracks in the helmet. The color of this blood was extremely rich, mixed with a bizarre dark green. Some people had long ago suspected that the demon commander was a member of the imperial clan. Today, this fact had finally been proven. But why was its blood mixed with a dark green? No one thought about this question for the time being. The crowd was stunned speechless by what had happened. The demon commander was heavily injured, vomiting blood. You truly are very strong, even surpassing Bi Hong before his death. The demon commander's voice became somewhat deeper, but it was not as unpleasant to hear as before. Although you are still no match for this commander must admit that it will be very difficult to kill you today. To the demons, killing Wang Po was even more important than killing the human commander. Since this mission could not be completed, since it had also suffered significant injuries, what use was there in remaining here? An order was sent from the summit of Mount Nuoralang to the plains. The wolf cavalry began to organize themselves and prepare to retreat. The Mountly sect master glanced at Wang Po. Mao Qiyu and Huairen also looked at Wang Po. What to do next would depend on Wang Po. As long as Wang Po nodded, the Mountly sect master's heaven-shrouding sword would descend to the summit of Mount Nuoralang. Huairen was heavily injured, but she should still be able to detain the Duke of Xuelao City, who had already been heavily injured by Mao Qiyu. Meanwhile, Mao Qiyu was responsible for keeping the 3rd and 8th demon generals on the plains. In this way, there really might be a chance to kill the demon commander. This seemed simple, but it was actually a complex method of alternating tactics. The human experts glanced at each other and made their arrangements. The wind blew against his robe, making a flapping sound. Wang Po did not nod, nor did he make any other movement, not even the tiniest of movements. He was like a stone statue. He did not want to give Mao Qiyu and the others the wrong signal, as the consequences would be dire. Mao Qiyu and the other two understood his meaning. They were somewhat worried, somewhat regretful, but they also relaxed a little. At this moment, the darkness surging out of the valley suddenly grew much fainter. Because the sun in the sky had become incomparably bright. A figure appeared in the blazing sunlight. Like a falling star, it crashed towards the demon commander on the peak. The Prince of Xiang. In his view, this was the best chance to kill the demon commander. No matter what, he could not let it go. Wang Po's expression instantly changed at this sight. Chapter 102. The water gurgled and the wooden ladle was placed horizontally. The green leaf was still not back. Tonight's dinner was still as simple as before. Chen Chongxing and Go Hanshi's eating speed was slightly faster than usual. For the former, this was a very rare occurrence. From this, one could imagine how important the dossier they were going to read and the matter they were going to discuss tonight was. The plates on the table were taken away, and Enhua brought over some orange water for them to rinse their mouths with, as well as hot towels. In the corner of the side hall, there was a small mountain of dossiers. The ones they needed to read had already been selected and sorted out. The night was dark and the palace was silent. Chen Chong Xing and Go Han sure looked at the files in their hands and didn't speak for a long time. They already knew the final outcome of that war, but they only saw the details now. No one could have imagined that the Prince of Xiang would silently abandon the 30,000 soldiers of the right camp of the Western Army and hide alone near the summit of Mount Nwari. While the demon commander and Wang Po were both injured, he jumped out of the sun and launched the most decisive attack of his life. If this sneak attack was successful, it wouldn't be a big deal for him to leave the camp without permission. Moreover, he would receive the greatest contribution in this war so far. Whether the Prince of Xiang wanted to use this merit to exchange for Prince Chen Lu's departure from the capital or the honor of being exempted from death, it was all very easy. Perhaps it was precisely because he had thought of this that the Prince of Xiang had made such a risky and fearless move. Unfortunately, he still underestimated the demon commander's strength. Wang Po was heavily injured and could no longer fight. The demon commander had indeed suffered significant injuries, but she had not been burned to death by the blazing sun. The darkness in the valley became his weapon at the crucial moment. Those who saw the scene were shocked speechless. The Prince of Xiang was not willing to retreat, so his sneak attack became a forceful assault. The demon commander had used the mountain-toppling fiend as the price to flee Mount Nuoralang. The Prince of Xiang stood on the head of the dead mountain-toppling fiend and watched the demon commander flee to the north. His confidence was reinvigorated, and his assault became a pursuit. This chase took him 600 li away, but he was still unable to kill the demon commander. This was because Black Robe had set up an array formation there, and there were 4 high-ranking demon generals waiting for him. If the Mountly Sect Master had not promptly arrived, the Prince of Xiang would have died on the spot. Even so, the Prince of Xiang and the Mountly Sect Master were still surrounded. Suddenly, a huge kite flew over from the sky. No one knew if Xiao Zhang was injured or where he was now. Just like how no one knew where Zheshio was or what he was doing. Some people are used to fighting alone. Since the start of the war, the most spectacular battle between sanctuary experts had come to an end. The demons had suffered grievous casualties. Of the 4 high-ranking demon generals that had tried to kill the Prince of Xiang and the Mountly Sect Master, only 2 had survived, and they had also lost a member of the Council of Elders and a duke. No human experts had perished, but Mao Chiyu and Huai Ren were both heavily injured, and the Mountly Sect Master's injuries were especially severe. Go Hanshi replied, "Master has returned to Mountly to recuperate from his injuries. The other seniors also need to rest for a while before they can return to the front lines." Experts of the divine domain were very difficult to kill unless they were surrounded and attacked, or if they were facing an even higher level existence like the Tianhai Divine Empress. But because their injuries were too severe, they were still forced to stop. Wang Po was no exception. From Chen Chongqing's perspective, this was Black Robe's intention. Even if he had to pay an extremely heavy price, he still wanted the human experts of the divine domain to temporarily lose the ability to fight. At the very least, they would not be able to use their full strength until the winter arrived. Without the experts of the divine domain, the advance of the human armies would be greatly hindered. Just how much longer would their journey, which was already much slower than originally planned, be delayed? When the human armies truly reached Xuelao City, would the drifting snowflakes still give them any chance? To use the deaths of 2 experts of the divine domain and 2 high-ranking demon generals to buy 10 some days of time in the overall scheme was not something a normal person could possess. Every time they thought of this, Chen Chongqing and Go Hanshi would feel wary of the young demon lord, even faintly respect him. The most frightening was still Black Robe. From his calculations, he had probably long ago calculated all the details of the battle between the demon commander and Wang Po. He had calculated which human experts would appear, even calculated that the Prince of Xiang would leave the western camp on his own. It could only be said that his understanding of the human mind had already reached a terrifying level. If the battle around Mount Nuoralang had ended like this, Black Robe could have at least declared his victory in the second phase of the war. But in reality, he had lost. The human armies had broken through the demons' second line of defense earlier than expected. Before the summer had even completely ended, the 3 cavalrymen at the very front could already see the silhouette of Xuelao City in the distance. This was because during the Battle of Mount Nuoralang, a few unexpected changes had occurred on the battlefield. The most important person in this battle was the commander-in-chief of the human armies, Divine General He Ming. Everyone believed that Divine General He Ming's appointment as commander-in-chief of the human armies was the result of a political compromise, or perhaps a random order from the emperor and the pope on a whim. Moreover, just like in that war several hundred years ago, ordinary soldiers other than the black-armored heavy cavalry had little effect on the outcome of the battle, unless one was Wang Jitsa. But Divine General He Ming had played an extremely important role in this battle. On that day, when the battle was at its most intense, the plains in a radius of several hundred li in front of the mountain had become the battlefield of experts of the divine domain. Divine General He Ming's decision to place the Central Army tent at the very front was not a wise decision, especially at a time like this. The terrifying shockwaves from a battle between experts of the divine domain were also very harmful to ordinary soldiers. Relying on the protection of the formation to isolate the auras of the sanctuary experts, the soldiers launched a relentless counterattack against the wolf cavalry of the demon race. However, the situation had already become extremely perilous. The howling winds were like invisible plows, tearing tents apart from time to time and sending rocks flying into the air. Who knew how many soldiers were smashed into bloody heads? A massive hole had been torn in the Central Army tent, wind and sand constantly pouring in. The tallow candles had been extinguished long ago, and only the night pearls still emitted light, illuminating the gloomy map. Divine General He Ming gazed at the map, his expression extremely calm. He calmly issued order after order, and then the orderlies would rush off. Every time the wolf cavalry charged, they would get a little closer to the Central Army tent. In the last attack, the huge alpha wolf was less than 2 miles away from the central tent. Yi Xiaoyan gazed at the profile of Divine General He Ming, a complicated expression in her eyes. She had proposed many times to retreat, but Divine General He Ming had never agreed. Even more confusing to her was that after a certain order, even the sacred light crossbows responsible for suppressing the charge of the wolf cavalry had become much sparser. The sword array formed by 300-some South Stream Temple disciples was just outside the camp. Even if the wolf cavalry charged, even if that Duke of Xuelao City fighting with her martial granduncle outside the camp attacked, she was confident that she could protect this divine general. The problem was, how many South Stream Temple disciples would die? Just as she was thinking these questions, Divine General He Ming suddenly asked a question. At the time, everyone in the tent had found this question very strange. Where is the demi-human North Pacifying Army? A staff officer froze for a moment before replying. A few days ago, they left Song Province. They just left Song Province. Divine General He Ming sighed, appearing extremely regretful. They're too far away, so we'll have to do it ourselves. Yi Xiaoyan was very confused, thinking, even if the demi-human reinforcements arrived long ago, would they really be able to save you? In the end, those stories of tens of thousands of cavalry charging out of the valleys were just stories. Unless they were like the demons and had spent several centuries laying down arrays and paths, in this world where red falcons and demon vultures flew together, it would be very difficult for such a sneak attack to occur. Once they're done fighting, it'll be our turn. Divine General He Ming raised his head, his gaze piercing through the tattered roof of the tent to the sky. Massive figures were faintly discernible in the thick black smoke, the bright sword glows seeming to come from another world. This was the world of divine domain experts. Yi Xiaoyan still did not understand the meaning of Divine General He Ming's words. She subconsciously turned to the darkest corner of the tent. Chapter 103. After Wang Po and the demon commander clashed, the first to move was not the Prince of Xiang, who had jumped out of the sun, nor was it Black Robe, who had been hiding behind a crafty scheme. It was Divine General He Ming. He rubbed his tired face and walked to the door of the Central Army tent, gazing into the distance. The wolf cavalry had stopped their attacks, transforming into streams of darkness that retreated into the darkness beneath Mount Nuoralang. The demon commander had fled in defeat, the Prince of Xiang had followed, and the Mountly sect master had pursued. Huai Run was sitting on the ground recovering from her injuries, Mao Chiyu was blocking the 3rd and 8th demon generals, and Wang Po was standing motionless. The Duke of Shuilao City landed on the grassland, kicking up mud as he struggled to his feet. His body was covered in wounds, and he looked like he was about to die. "You are the commander-in-chief of the human race?" The Duke stared at Divine General He Ming, madness in his eyes as he said, "Then your luck today is truly very bad." Although he was about to die, although He Ming was also a star condensation expert, the threshold to the divine domain was truly very high. He really could still kill Divine General He Ming. The girls of South Stream Temple surrounded the Central Army tent like scattered white flowers. They had not expected this expert of the divine domain to fall from the sky, and for a moment they were rather flustered. Yi Xiaoyan was not panicked. She clearly shouted, "Withdraw." Divine General He Ming said, "Disperse." His voice was very calm, but it was also very firm. Yi Xiaoyan was very confused, even angry, but when she recalled the temple master's orders, she clenched her teeth and yelled, "All disciples, disperse." White flowers bloomed and drifted away, the surrounding tents collapsing with them. Several hundred crossbowmen, armed with sacred light crossbows, aimed at the blood-covered Duke of Shuilao City. Several hundred crossbow bolts imbued with sacred light shot out, forming a pillar of light several feet wide that pierced through his body. The majority of the Duke's demon body had vanished. He lowered his head to look at his own body, a hint of confusion in his eyes. Dense footsteps shattered the silence as the cavalry returned from the battlefield. Before the crowd could even get over the shock and astonishment brought about by the sight before them, they heard an even more shocking order. Divine General He Ming ordered, "We will depart in 60 seconds. A deputy general asked in shock, "My lord, where?" Divine General He Ming replied, "Of course, Shuilao City." He said this very matter-of-factly. Yi Xiaoyan was very shocked. She suddenly recalled the young master of the Tang clan on the Divine Avenue many years ago, and then she recalled the senior Su Li that the temple master would occasionally mention. The specific arrangements were naturally left to the staff officers and other generals. Divine General He Ming walked back to the tent and came to the gloomy corner. He softly said, "It's been hard on the Holy Maiden." Su Yorong opened her eyes and looked at him, asking, "How confident are you?" For the past few days, she had not closed her eyes for many days and nights. She was extremely exhausted. Today, she had wanted to have a good sleep, but in the end, she had been dragged into the storeroom by the Mountly sect master to chat with. With great difficulty, the Mountly sect master had left, so she had hidden herself here. Leaning against the box, she had wanted to take a nap, but before she could sleep for long, the battle outside had ended, and someone had come to bother her. She hadn't slept well, so she wasn't in a good mood. Naturally, she spoke rudely. Divine General He Ming thought it over and said, 30%. Su Yorong thought about it and said, "That's enough." Divine General He Ming sighed ruefully. Discussing matters with the Holy Maiden is truly delightful. Su Yorong said, "You're right, if it's Chen Chong Xing who comes, then it'll be troublesome." She took out an object made of bronze from her sleeve. It was the magical artifact Shang Xingzhou had made from the clear sky mirror. She was not intending to contact the capital, because the other magical artifact was not in Chen Chong Xing's hands, but in Shui He's. She told Shui He two things. First, the Prince of Xiang was heavily injured and would not be able to return to the West Nine camp in the short term. Second, Commander-in-Chief He Ming had requested that the entire Western Army advance. Within 3 days, they had to reach the center of the Bunnan Highlands and capture Saluo City. He was probably well aware of the meaning of these 2 words, and he had obtained the joint guarantee of Divine General He Ming and Su Yorong. Just as expected, later that day, He went to the right camp, seized the Prince of Xiang's military authority, and then led the West Nine camp north. The Central Army and Eastern Army also began to move. The fastest was the vanguard of the Eastern Army, the North Third Camp. They marched for a day and night, bypassing the Starry Gorge and seizing the 5 Platforms River, thus seizing the most important military pass on the southern side of the Bunnan Highlands. With this as a breakthrough point, the human army advanced with unimaginable speed, forcefully cutting the second defense line of the demons into 3. The most important factor was time. The 17 days lost in the first campaign had been completely seized back in this process. Black Robe's strategy could be described as a complete failure. Chen Chongqing put down the file in his hand and fell into a daze. Reading on paper, he still felt it to be shallow. The North Third Camp of the Left Army marched for a day and night, bypassing the Starry Gorge and seizing the 5 Platforms River. It was just a short sentence on paper, but in the real world, what sort of heroic and courageous story was this? The most important reason is that when the demons attacked, the North Third Camp did not suffer any losses. Go Hanshi thought of the 3 names at the very top of the list of military achievements and smiled. It was not because they had rendered a great service or won glory for Mount Li, but because they were still alive and well. Crucially, why did those several thousand vultures that had flown out of the cliff suddenly fall to the plains and burn themselves to death? The officers and soldiers on the front lines could not understand this problem, and Liang Banhu had also expressed his confusion in the private message he had sent back. Seeing Chen Chongqing's expression, Go Hanshi vaguely guessed at the truth, but since Chen Chongqing did not mention it, it was not convenient for him to say anything. Although the story between the Pope and his protector had not caused a ruckus, everyone who needed to know knew. After all, starting from that autumn, no one had seen that black-clothed girl at Chen Chongqing's side. When he thought about how she had left the warm islands of the south and gone to the snowy plains that her father had once set foot on, Chen Chongqing felt rather complex. Then he noticed that Go Hanshi was smirking at him. He felt rather awkward. Thinking of something, he changed the subject. What did that demon freak in the cliff constantly shout before he died? Didn't Su Li leave? Go Hanshi said with a smile. I'm saying that this is what that demon shouted. He should be a member of the ghost-driving tribe of the demon race, most skilled at controlling monsters. He's even more terrifying than the shamans of the south. I heard that he was pursued by Marshal Granduncle for many years and was already extinct. I didn't think that he would still be alive. Why had Su Li pursued the ghost-driving tribe? There were no records in the Mount Li sword sect, so Go Hanshi did not know and Chen Chongqing could not guess. They glanced at each other and thought of a possibility. Perhaps Su Li had seen the importance of that tribe to the war several hundred years ago? Perhaps it really was like this. Because before he left this world, Su Li had always been fighting the demons. It was not fighting, but war. What about that fellow who had been fighting the demons since he was born? Chen Chongqing very much wanted to know just where Zhixiu was. Go Hanshi was also very concerned, because Zhixiu was now Mount Li's son-in-law. The front lines had their own methods of recording military achievements. What they now knew was that Zhixiu had killed 10-some demon soldiers since the start of the war. To an ordinary soldier, this was already a military achievement worth being proud of, but it seemed rather strange when placed on Zhixiu. His abilities were definitely not limited to this. Just where was he? What was he doing? It seems that I'll have to go early, Chen Chongqing said to Go Hanshi. In the spring, Go Hanshi had said to him that he could only leave the capital when he could see Shuelao City. Although those 3 cavalrymen could already see Shuelao City, the human army was still very far away. Why did he have to go now? Because although the human army had obtained victory in this battle, in other aspects, the demons had also barely managed to achieve their objectives. The vast majority of the human experts of the divine domain, Wang Po included, had suffered heavy injuries and would not be able to fight again in the short term. At a time like this, it was very easy for a soldier's mentality to become unstable, because experts of the divine domain represented confidence. If Chen Chongqing appeared on the front lines now, he would be extremely effective in stabilizing the morale of the army. If Su Yorong appeared with him, the effect would be even more obvious. Chen Chongqing said, "As long as His Majesty is in the imperial palace, the capital will not fall into chaos, nor will the hearts of the people." This time, Go Hanshi did not object, because the current situation was already very different from the spring. The capital had already welcomed the true summer. As the wind blew through the city, it was filtered by the Luo River and the willow trees by the river, cooling it down a little. However, when it encountered the red walls of the palace, it became hot and dry. Mou's face was slightly red and her temples were a little sweaty. Her left hand was constantly fanning herself with a handkerchief. The button around her neck was not properly fastened, revealing a portion of her pure white skin. Chen Chongqing sat across from her. As he gazed at the tea in his cup, he felt like a flower was about to bloom. Chapter 104. Chen Chongqing had already bid farewell to his senior brother. Before he left, he naturally had to see her. In the past, Mou had been an extremely famous beauty of the capital, and now she was even more beautiful and moving. He knew that she was not trying to seduce him, but this place was truly too hot. Even the cooling array in the hall seemed to be of no use. This place is too small. He looked around and said. This was a room in the back of the hall that had been specially partitioned off. Compared to the architecture of the imperial palace, it truly was very small and not very well ventilated. Before the Empress hung the curtain to oversee politics, she studied government affairs with Emperor Xian for 20-some years and always sat here. Mou mocked. When His Majesty first entered the palace, the venerable Taoist also sat here during the court conference. Now that I'm sitting here, do I have the right to be dissatisfied? Chen Chongqing bitterly smiled. Then it truly is hard to say. Mou arched her brows. Do all of you think that I'm very ambitious? There was a time when Chen Chongqing truly did think that she was very ambitious, not when the Divine Empress was still alive, but 10 years ago. She had always maintained contact with him. When His Majesty ordered her to return to the capital, she had written a rather hesitant letter. Later on, he realized that she had already made up her mind. But when she insisted on marrying the Prince of Luoyang, Chen Chongqing felt that his view of her was perhaps not correct. If she really was ambitious, she should have married someone with even more authority. She could have even married the emperor and become the new empress. That depends on what you mean by ambition, Chen Chongqing said. Mou replied, if ambition means power, then I admit that I have a very strong desire in this aspect, but I only need to be able to guarantee that I have the right to meddle in the affairs of the court. These words were rather convoluted. Chen Chongqing thought it over and finally understood. He curiously asked, why do you like to handle government affairs so much? Because I'm a female official taught by the Empress. Mou looked at him and said, Yorong and I were taught by the Empress. I like it and have the ability to handle government affairs, while she is more skilled in massacring everyone. Chen Chongqing thought of the many scenes from these past few years, and could only silently agree to these words. Mou said, of course, she's even more like the Empress than I am. Perhaps it's because she's more capable of killing people than I am. 10-some years ago, in the nearby palace hall, the Tianhai Divine Empress had once told her and Su Yorong that killing was the correct path. Mou knew that she couldn't do it. Perhaps it was because she had seen too many of her clansmen being killed when she was young. That year on the road of peace, when she chopped Zhou Tong with her sword until his entire body was covered in blood, it seemed like she had used up all the killing intent in her body. Chen Chongqing didn't want to continue this topic and asked, "After so many years of marriage, is he still so afraid of you?" He was asking the prince of Luoyang. Mou raised her eyebrows and said, "That's out of respect, not fear. Do you think everyone is like you?" Chen Chongqing didn't think that he would get into trouble and felt a little awkward. Mou let him go and said, "He's learning to cook at home every day. He just learned the 17th method of steeping radish. He looks very happy." Chen Chongqing saw that she was also very happy. He was also very happy but also a bit complicated. He looked at the hair on her temples and looked away. He picked up the teacup and took a sip, asking, "Have you been sleeping well recently?" Mou beamed with joy and said, "Very good, you know what? Even a fat person's body is cold, so hugging him is very comfortable." On the way to the front lines, Chen Chongqing couldn't help but laugh at himself every time he recalled what had happened that day in the imperial palace. This sort of scene occurred far too often, making Enhua rather nervous. Fu Xinji and Chen Fugue, now teachers of the Orthodox Academy, were also very uneasy. Chen Chongqing had not brought too many Li Palace priests with him, but many students from the Ivy Academies. He was using the excuse of patrolling, while the students from the Ivy Academies were using the excuse of practicing on the front lines. Not long after entering Tianliang County, before they had even reached Xuanyang City, Chen Chongqing took Enhua and left the procession. The records of the various Taoist churches were constantly being delivered to his hands. He also saw with his own eyes the true situation among the people, saw soldiers recovering from their wounds, and then saw the plains. Before entering the real battlefield, he once more recalled Mou's final words in the imperial palace. "It's already been 2 months since the people of the capital have had meat to eat. This year, only 3 ships of cotton have arrived at Luling. If you lose at the front lines, countless refugees will appear this winter, countless people will freeze to death on the road. This is a war between countries, a war fought with the strength of a country, so you must win. Otherwise, if you lose, your country will be destroyed." Yes, this was a war between countries. Both sides would have to throw in all their strength, disregarding all costs to strive for the final victory. But there were some things that Chen Chongqing still did not understand. He and Go Hanshi had discussed them many times, but they had not come to a convincing conclusion. In both the first and second stages of the war, the methods used by the demons were far too violent. Even for a war between countries, they were still somewhat excessive. Logically speaking, no one would choose to destroy indiscriminately at the start of a war. Even if the demons were relatively weaker, why would they be so lacking in confidence? Moreover, this method had no chance of changing the resolve of the humans, so what meaning did it have other than hastening the defeat of the demons? It was very difficult for those involved to clearly see the entire situation, not even the demon lord or the demon commander. The perspective of an outsider actually made it easier for them to see certain problems. For example, Shang Xingzhou had long ago noticed that something was off that Chen Chongqing and Go Hanshi felt. A group was traveling from Mount Han to Mount Li, stopping for a night in Luoyang. On the morning of the next day, Shang Xingzhou left Luoyang. No one knew of this matter. He only brought with him a young Taoist boy carved from ice and jade. 10 some years ago, Xining Village's old temple had become a place of great importance to the protection of the imperial court, but which soldier could stop him? He brought the young Taoist boy into the old temple. After a moment of silence, he ordered the young Taoist boy to continue reciting the canon of flowing west under the tree, and then he left the temple and went to the stream bank. The stream water was just as clear as it had been in the past. The falling flowers flowed with the waves, adding to their liveliness as they passed by him. A monk appeared on the bank of the stream. He was still the same as he was 10 some years ago. His face was handsome, and it was impossible to tell his exact age. He wore a black monk's robe, its surface covered in cracks and dust. Shang Xingzhou said to him, "Your Highness, I wish to know a few things." This monk was the king of Chu's son. In terms of seniority, he was Yuren's uncle. If he were still in the court, he would naturally be a prince. If not for the coup of the 100-herb garden, perhaps he would now be the emperor. Of course, Shang Xingzhou would never admit it. The monk said, "Please speak." Shang Xingzhou asked, "Just what does the Sacred Light Continent want to do?" The monk said nothing. Shang Xingzhou indifferently said, "In the end, you are still a person on our side." The compassion in the monk's eyes completely transformed into desolation. Nothing more than a wanderer without a home to return to. Shang Xingzhou suddenly said, "Tianhai heavily injured your soul and prevented you from returning. Now that I think about it, it wasn't a bad thing." These words were clearly suspecting that he was conspiring with the Sacred Light Continent. The monk said, "Imperial hegemony will come to nothing." Shang Xingzhou said, "One has to consider the future generations. No matter what, it is still the blood of the Chen clan." The monk was quiet for a very long time, then asked, "Is this your promise? If I die, my students will bring you back." Shang Xingzhou seemed to think of something. After a moment of silence, he added, "If they refuse, I will have this student bring you back." The monk turned to the young Taoist boy under the tree and revealed a satisfied expression. "What do you want me to do?" Shang Xingzhou said, "I want you to help me send a message and also a thing." The monk said, "The Sacred Light Continent is too far away. That will require a very long time." Shang Xingzhou said, "It's just an idle move." The monk asked, "What message?" Shang Xingzhou said, "Tell Su Li that something has happened." The monk said, "I really don't know what will happen to the Sacred Light Continent." Shang Xingzhou said, "I also don't know what will happen, but I think that he probably knows that something is happening here." The monk fell silent for a while, then asked, "Thing?" Shang Xingzhou handed over a sword. The sword was wrapped in cloth, and in the middle was a ring forged from melted bronze. The monk took the sword, his fingers gripping the bronze ring. He was extremely careful not to touch any other part of the sword. A good sword. The monk's gaze fell on the bronze ring and he sighed. Such a treasure was actually melted by you to send a sword through space. Truly extravagant. The heaven-shrouding sword was naturally a good sword. The bronze was a fragment of the clear sky mirror. Chapter 105. The war had entered its third phase and also its cruelest phase. The two sides were getting closer and closer, the battles were getting more and more frequent, and the casualties were increasing. Strategy and tactics were becoming less and less useful in this phase. Willpower and resources became the most important factors, and it was only a matter of which side gave out first. 1,000 li from Shuilao City was a cliff on the plains, and there were many hot springs in the mountains. The capital was very hot, but the weather here was rather cool. The mist exuded by the hot springs permeated the mountains, making for a rather pleasant sight. Chen Chongqing sat in the hot spring, his gaze piercing through the mist, the curtains, and the banners of the orthodoxy cavalry to the path leading out of the valley. Many years ago, he had been prepared to leave through this path, but in the end, he had still turned back and seen the unconscious Su Li. Yes, this was the hot spring from back then, but at the time all he could see was snow. Now, his eyes were filled with an endless green, making him feel rather unfamiliar. "Your Holiness, it's time." And Hua squatted by the hot spring and said, her voice very soft and gentle as if she was afraid of startling him. Chen Chongqing came to his senses and stood up from the hot spring. She took an enormous towel and wrapped it around his body, carefully wiping it clean. And Hua looked at his face and felt somewhat comforted, thinking, the hot spring truly does have its uses. She helped him out of the hot spring and into the pavilion up ahead to rest. The pavilion and a few other buildings in the mountain had all been newly built just a few days ago. Chen Chongqing was not used to such a lavish display in a time of war. He believed that this would make many ordinary soldiers angry. To his surprise, the soldiers passing by from the plains and seeing this sight were not dissatisfied. On the contrary, they felt that it was only right and proper, even very proud. Chen Chongqing thought for a very long time, but still could not understand why. He sat in the pavilion and gazed into the distance. In the distant plains, many soldiers were currently advancing in the direction of Xuelao City. Even at this distance, he seemed to be able to hear the dragon horses. Yes, they really did seem to be from Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. The soldiers knew that the Pope was in this stone mountain, but they didn't know if he could see this pavilion. The news had long ago spread across the front lines. When passing by this stone mountain, unless it was an urgent military matter, the cavalry would dismount and lead the way. There were also many soldiers who would ignore military orders and run out of their ranks, kneeling and kowtowing to the stone mountain. Only then would they contentedly return to their ranks, not even caring if they were punished by their superiors. Chen Chongqing had seen this scene many times. He couldn't understand why these ordinary soldiers would think that he was proud, but since they wanted to see him, he was willing to let them see him. So in the past few days, he would often sit under the pavilion, even if Anhua, Linghai Jiwang, and the others objected. A cool breeze entered the mountain from the plains. Before it could be warmed by the hot spring, it landed on Chen Chongqing's face. His body, which had heated up after being soaked in the hot spring, gradually cooled down. The redness on his face gradually faded, and he became pale again. He was very thin and haggard. The cold wind blew again, and the white crane landed. Then, it flew to the pavilion and stood on one leg. It squinted its eyes so that the soldiers in the distant wilderness could see it more clearly. Su Yorong walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down at the springs that were like steaming pots. She said, "If you continue like this, you will die before the city is breached." She didn't turn around to look at Chen Chongqing, and her face didn't show any expression. It was as if she was just casually saying it and didn't really care. Or maybe it was because she had already said it many times, but Chen Chongqing didn't respond. After coming to the front lines, Chen Chongqing had already refined 2 bottles of cinnabar pills. Everyone understood what this meant. He naturally understood it the best, but when he saw so many young faces contorted in fear of death and heard so many sobs, he had no choice but to do this. And he had been injured. This was the front lines. Although he was the Pope and was heavily protected, he was also a prime target of the demon race. The most dangerous time had been when the second demon general had led a group of demon experts and used vultures to conduct an aerial assault. He had also suffered significant injuries in that battle. In the midsummer, he had come to this plain, and Xuelao City was already faintly visible. It was now the beginning of autumn, and it was said that the vanguard could already clearly see the walls of Xuelao City. The North Third Camp could even clearly see the faces of the soldiers defending the city, but in the end, no one had truly reached Xuelao City. The closer they got to Xuelao City, the firmer the demons' will to resist, the more fearless they became of death. Many soldiers even felt that this mission was impossible to complete. It was clear that with just a little more pressure, the demon lord in Xuelao City and the hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors outside the city might not be able to hold on. But at this moment, many people in the human army could no longer hold on. On the same night, a few soldiers who could no longer hold on were forced to retreat south, the vast majority of them heavily injured. Yi Xiaoyan led several disciples, the teachers of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, and 3 clergymen of the Li Palace, escorting a single person back south. Just who was this person that could make her leave the most important central army tent and put on such a grand display of force? Even the heavily injured Prince of Xiang, stripped of his military authority, was still persisting on the front lines. Why was this person so important? No one knew what Yi Xiaolian was thinking, but to the Li Palace clergyman and the teachers of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, this person was naturally many times more important than the Prince of Xiang. Because he was the Pope's friend. Chen Chongqing was not good with words, and his way of thinking was overly simple. In a certain person's words, it was easy to make people speechless. But from Xining village to the capital, he had still made a few friends. But when speaking of his friends, many people's first reaction would definitely be Tang 36. Tang 36's cheeks were already sunken in, but they were still bright red like a cooked prawn. His eyes were also extremely bright, making one feel somewhat flustered. Chen Chongqing sat by the stretcher and said to him, "When you wanted to buy that restaurant, I felt that it was inappropriate." Tang 36 weakly asked, "What was inappropriate about it?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Eating too many blue lobsters will cause you to suffer retribution. Look at you now." It was obvious that although Tang 36 had been seriously ill in the last few days, he still frequently looked at himself in the mirror and flaunted his beauty, so he was able to quickly understand Chen Chongqing's joke. Once he understood the joke, he naturally had to laugh. Tang 36 laughed and coughed at the same time, looking very uncomfortable. Yi Xiaolian placed the ice towel on his forehead and turned her head to glare at Chen Chongqing. Only after glaring at him did she realize what she had done. She couldn't help but panic and repeatedly beg for forgiveness. Chen Chongqing naturally did not care about her. "Yorong is next door. Go see her." Yi Xiaolian softly agreed, but she became even more nervous. She thought to herself, "How should I explain this to the holy maiden?" After Yi Xiaolian left, Tang 36 looked into Chen Chongqing's eyes and asked, "Just what kind of illness do I have?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Your mind is too exhausted, and the cold has entered your internal organs. It's very serious." Tang 36's eyes were like will-o'-the-wisp. "I think there's a problem with this illness. I've seriously thought about it and feel that I still need to love all of you even more and write even more seriously. Thank you, everyone." Chapter 106. Chen Chongqing smiled and said, "I know you are not satisfied, but there is no problem." Tang 36 was silent for a while and said, "You are the best doctor. If you can't cure me, where else can I go?" Chen Chongqing said, "I'm not good at colds, and the cinnabar pill isn't effective." Tang 36 sneered, "Even if you give me that thing to eat, I won't eat it because I don't eat people." Chen Chongqing said, "So you need to go back and treat your illness first." Tang 36 was silent for a while, then said, "Our gatekeeper has aged a lot. Without my help, I'm worried that his body won't be able to hold on." Chen Chongqing placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I will discuss this with someone. You leave first. Principal Mao is recuperating in Mount Han, you should also go there." The next morning, Tang 36 left and Yi Xiaolian left with him. This was agreed upon by Su Yurong. She didn't tell Chen Chongqing because she knew that Chen Chongqing was very slow when it came to these kinds of matters between men and women. In other words, he didn't understand at all. However, she also knew that Chen Chongqing was very knowledgeable in other areas, such as medicine. She glanced at him but didn't say anything. Chen Chongqing looked at the fluttering flag in the distance. His expression was calm and determined. He looked at the world under the pavilion. The world was also watching him. His calmness gave the countless soldiers at the front line confidence. In fact, very few people knew that his heart was not at peace. There were many things that he almost couldn't bear, such as those life and death situations, and Tang 36's high fever that couldn't be brought down. Fortunately, he had someone to rely on. Su Yorong had always stood by his side, not as a wife, nor as a subordinate, but as an equal. When she clasped her hands behind her, Ling Hai Jiwang and the others even felt that she was taller than Chen Chongqing. "This morning, we received news that senior brother Liang is dead. 2 of the Sword Hall elders died in battle. Guan Bai went to reinforce them, but he also died." Su Yorong's expression was very calm, as though the news of these deaths had nothing to do with her. Chen Chongqing closed his eyes and opened them after a while. Everyone will die. As long as we can solve the problem in the end, this kind of death is not a waste. It is meaningful and merciful. After saying this, she walked down the mountain. The gazes of Linghai Jiwang and the priests followed her, filled with reverence and pity. The soldiers and believers at the front line needed strength from Chen Chongqing's calmness. Chen Chongqing needed to obtain power from her. So who could she rely on? Now, even Anhua was beginning to pity her and worship her. Xuelao City was very large, and with the tensome citadels and the tents set up by the tribal warriors who had rushed over from all over, it took up an even larger area. When the southern part of the city was just ushered in by the chilly wind, the fields in the north of the city had already begun to be covered in snow, but there was still no trace of the human army. Zheshio was extremely confident that he was the first human to come to these plains. If he could be considered a human, it was not because he was braver or more adventurous than the other soldiers, but because to the human army, coming to the plains to the north of Xuelao City was meaningless to the overall situation of the battle. But this was very meaningful to him in the battle. 7 days ago, he had encountered a demon squad in the ruins of the ancient beast arena, 120 li to the west of Xuelao City. He had been fighting demons since he was a child, so his understanding of the demon race far surpassed that of an ordinary person. A few details had made him notice the uniqueness of the leader of this squad. This leader was very young and very tall. From the style of the clan insignia he wore, he probably belonged to a clan very close to the imperial clan, and he probably had a very high status in the clan. Why would such a young noble appear on the dangerous battlefield? This was not in line with Zheshio's understanding of the upper class of demon society. If it had been 1,000 some years ago, the demon nobles would still have maintained a martial ethos, relying on bravery and military achievements as the source of their glory. But now they had long since decayed. Zheshio continued to follow this demon squad and ultimately reached a conclusion. This young noble had left the city under the protection of the experts of his clan in order to accumulate military merit, but he did not want to encounter any danger. Thus, this squad had only stopped at the ruins of the ancient beast arena for half a day before beginning to advance north. Everyone knew that the human armies would not be able to circle around to the north of Xuelao City in a short period of time and launch an attack. As for how this young noble would be able to produce enough military merit when he returned to Xuelao City, Zheshio was confident that this would be an extremely easy task for him. Perhaps the heads of several dozen human soldiers were already prepared, just waiting for him to return to the city and load them onto the carriage being dragged by the earth-imprisoning beast. Xuelao City was already in a perilous moment, yet the nobles in the city were still thinking of swindling military merit. Zheshio didn't know if they were stupid or overly greedy. But anyone who dared to play such tricks at this moment was undoubtedly a truly powerful figure of the demon race. That young noble probably had an extraordinary status. From the moment he reached this conclusion, Zheshio felt an intense impulse, and then he formulated an extremely risky plan for this impulse. He decided to infiltrate Xuelao City. A pack of monsters came out of nowhere and began to attack the demon squad. With the experts of his clan protecting him, the young noble was not worried about his own safety. He was even in the mood to watch the blood vessels in the necks of those irascible monsters be cut. His pale face was flushed with excitement, as if he had been smeared with real blood. The monsters were all killed, but the demon squad had also paid a price. 3 of their bravest soldiers had suffered significant injuries, and most troublesome of all was that the snow and mud on the plains had been trampled into a pulp, mixing together and making it difficult to walk through. The squad decided to camp in the forest and stay for the night, using blood pigeons to send a message. The demon warrior and the young nobleman in the squad did not expect that this night would become the most terrifying night of their lives. The stench of blood gradually spread through the forest, and some monster seemed to be moving through the wet mud. The world was silent, and the clouds in the night sky gradually parted. The clearly visible moon could not give them any courage. They could only hear each other's gasps and feel that the weapons in their hands were getting colder and colder. Gradually, the gasps stopped and they could no longer feel the coldness of the weapons in their hands, because their bodies were slowly becoming ice cold. As it turned out, this was also the last night of their lives. The demon soldiers in the squad silently died. There were no warnings, no screams, no struggles, and certainly no fighting. The entire process was like an extremely bizarre pantomime, but there was no audience. Only the sparse stars in the south and the white moon witnessed it all. On the morning of the next day, according to the agreement, a squad of cavalry from Shualao City entered the forest. Some fully armored cavalry escorted 3 large carriages, the carriages filled with the corpses of human soldiers that they had painstakingly found in the south. When they thought about the rewards that their young master was about to bestow upon them, these cavalry found it difficult to maintain their dignified and cold expressions, their lips curling into the sweetest smiles. But when they entered the forest, they did not see that tall figure, only an incomparably tragic sight. Weeping could be heard without end as the demon knights brandished their weapons at the sky, venting the unease and fear in their hearts, narrating their sorrow, and swearing to take revenge for Gruel. It was hard to say whether Gruel was the young noble's name or the prefix of his entire clan. Soon after, they lifted the corpses of their companions from the forest onto the carriages and began their journey back to Shualao City, not daring to linger for too long. Of course, they used the excuse that they needed to return to the city as quickly as possible to warn that the human armies had already arrived in the north. On the journey back to the city, the demon knights once more fell into an intense dispute, probably over how to respond to the clan leader's inquiry and how to use gold to redeem their crimes. The mood of the squad became even more downcast, so much so that when they passed through the needle-leaved forest, they even forgot to take the venison that they had agreed on when they came. As they got closer and closer to Shualao City, they could see more and more dilapidated buildings. The majority of the houses were barely made from felt and wood. They were clearly very weak, leaking air everywhere, and there was no sense of beauty to speak of. If not for the fact that the low-level demons could endure the bitter cold, they would have never been able to survive. Upon hearing the hurried galloping, the low-level demons that were chopping wood and working hurriedly kneeled to the sides of the road, not even daring to raise their heads. In normal times, these knights might have been interested in using their leather whips to make these low-level demons feel pain, but they were in no mood at this moment. They wanted nothing more than to immediately return to Shualao City. Of course, if they could, they would even more like never to return to Shualao City. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Chidian. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 107. Whether it was willing or not, Shualao City would always be there, waiting for the returning wanderers or foreigners with ill intentions. The human armies were still in the south. The gate to the north was slightly more tightly guarded, but it was still possible to enter and leave as usual. The carriage pulled by the earth-imprisoning beasts drew many gazes as it rolled over the stones. The demons stared at the tall corpse in the carriage, their pale faces and dark blue eyes brimming with shock as they loudly yelled. The demons had many languages, and the different classes of Shualao City often used different languages, but at this moment, the majority of their cries contained similar syllables. No one noticed that there was a very long wound on the tall corpse, a small hole in the chest that just happened to be hidden by the shadow of the leather robe. If someone were to get close, they might see an extremely strange and terrifying sight. There was an eye in the small hole. Its eyes were very calm and devoid of emotion, but it was clearly alive. The grandson of the enormous Gru? Zheshio compared it to the top-secret information he had read in the army and understood who the young noble who had died at his hand was, so he no longer thought about it. Through the small hole in the young noble's body, he took measure of the streets and buildings of Xuelao City. The humans and high-class demons looked rather similar on the outside, but they were two completely different species. The two sides had fought for tens of thousands of years and had long ago formed an irreconcilable blood feud. Whether it was in terms of material or spirit, the two sides were completely cut off from each other. Only during the era of Grand Scholar Tungos had they had a very short period of very limited interaction. Over the countless years, only a very small number of demons had appeared in the capital, and the vast majority had met extremely miserable ends. As for the humans, ever since Wang Jitsa signed a truce with the Demon Lord, no human had been able to take a single step into Xuelao City. Zhixiu could be said to be the first person in several hundred years to enter Xuelao City. Xuelao City was strange to the humans, evil, the nest of devils, the abyss of sin, so just what was it? Zhixiu only knew that the walls of the city were extremely high, several times higher than those of Luoyang. Even though he had been in the city for a very long time, he could still clearly see the moss and snow on the walls. The streets here were straight and wide, the buildings also very large. The vast majority of them were built from stone. They seemed rather crude, but they also had an indescribable sense of beauty. Every once in a while, he could see a building with a pointed roof. He didn't know what it was for, but it gave off a majestic and sacred feeling. After walking for a long time, the sky gradually brightened and it was noon. Suddenly, the sunlight was blocked, leaving behind a patch of darkness. Zhixiu saw a black monolith. It was unknown what material the black stone tablet was made of, but when one looked at it, it seemed to be cleansed by sucking. As if it had been inspected, the earth-imprisoning beast continued to advance. More and more black monoliths entered Zhixiu's eyes. Every 10 zhang, he could see one towering between the green hills. Because his line of sight was blocked, he could not see the entire scene, but from what he could see, he could imagine just how spectacular it was. There were black tablets everywhere on the green hill. It looked like a huge graveyard, but it also looked like some kind of sacrificial array. Zhixiu felt the young noble's corpse being lifted up and then slowly and carefully placed into a pit that was slightly lower than the ground. He suddenly felt that something was wrong. In his original plan, he had planned to wait for the young noble to be buried, then wait underground for a few days before leaving to find Nank. Based on his understanding of the demons, the graveyard of this young noble's clan should be not far from the demon palace. When he saw those massive black tablets, he really did believe that this was the graveyard of the young noble's clan. The Gruel clan had always been especially massive, so they had the phrase Gruel. He believed that the gravestones of this clan would be a little larger than normal. But given the young noble's status, his burial should not have been so careless, even in a time of war. If this was not the graveyard of the Gruel clan, where was it? Why were there so many mysterious black tablets here? After a while, Zhixiu found it even stranger that the coffin lid did not fall. He extended a finger to the young noble's wound, pulled his clothes to the side, and peered out of the pit. His field of vision was still limited, and the first thing he saw was a black monolith. Only when he got closer could he clearly see that it was a square monolith. The top of the monolith was curled up into a sharp point that was aimed at the sky. Zhixiu's gaze followed the tip of the monolith to the sky. In the snowy plains, he would often use this angle to look at the sky. When he was tired from chasing and killing and needed to conceal himself, he would often bury himself in the snow and open his eyes to look at the gloomy sky. He would look at it for a very long time. He knew that after looking at it for a long time, it was easy to get the misconception that high and low would be reversed, that the sky would become an abyss, and that he would float in an empty space brimming with an uneasy feeling, just like right now. That feeling of emptiness grew stronger and stronger, ultimately becoming some sort of warning sign. On the other side of the sky, at the bottom of the abyss, there seemed to be an eye quietly watching him. Zhishu felt like he had lost control of his body. Cold sweat slowly seeped out of his body, and at the same time, it seemed to take away all his courage. At the highest point of the hill that he could not see, surrounded by several thousand black monoliths, Black Robe raised her head to the sky, doing something. Suddenly, Black Robe drew back her gaze and swept it over the several thousand black monoliths. At this moment, Zhishu's heart fiercely thumped outside of its normal rhythm. At the most crucial moment, his old illness, the tide rush of blood, caused him to wake up from this nightmare that had no real content. He realized that someone was observing him. He closed his eyes, and his breathing gradually stopped, just like a real dead man. Suddenly, snow began to fall from the depths of the gloomy sky, falling on the hill and into the pit, gradually covering up all the demon corpses. The war between the humans and demons had entered its most unendurable stalemate. The plains to the south of Shuilao City were filled with battles. There was not a single piece of pure land for a radius of 1,000 li, and death could occur at any moment. Both sides were exhausted to the extreme, numb to the extreme. All that was left was to see who would collapse first. The human army's sacred light crossbows were on the verge of running out, and the supplies in the rear had been unable to keep up since 10 some days ago. As for other supplies such as armaments and crystals, they had been cut off for several days. The Western Army, which was currently sweeping through the demon bases on the perimeter, had also not received any good news. The demons were also not faring much better. The majority of the armaments used to defend the city could no longer be repaired, so much so that the bravest of the human cavalry could sometimes get within 3 li of the city walls. On a certain morning, a shout of joy suddenly came from the northern plains, soon followed by the faint sound of singing. Gradually, the shouts and singing began to come from the south, transforming into thunderous cheers upon entering Shuilao City. In the end, the hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors on the plains outside the city also began to howl. At the very start, the human army had noticed the movements of the demons and warily and perplexedly observed, not knowing what was going on. The cheers of the demon soldiers grew louder and louder, while the human soldiers grew more and more nervous. Divine General He Ming gazed up at the gloomy sky and finally understood what was going on. He extended a hand to catch a snowflake drifting down. It was snowing. If nothing unexpected happens, the 4th month will be the last full moon in the Book of Heaven's selection. I will write it with all my might. Thank you, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Starting Point to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 108. The first snowfall of the year came much earlier than usual. According to the records of the army, this was the earliest year in the last 300 years that Shuilao City had officially seen snow. The snowfall did not mean that the weather would immediately turn cold, but it at least indicated a trend. Even more frightening was that for both sides, already exhausted to the extreme, this psychological suggestion might directly alter the course of the battle. In Shuilao City, where the snow might not melt for half a year, human soldiers fighting in this sort of environment was no different from throwing away their lives. Everyone understood what this snowfall meant for this battle. In order to destroy the confidence that the demon soldiers had re-established, in order to shatter this inauspicious omen, even if it was just to make the human soldiers think less about this problem, Divine General He Ming had immediately launched another attack. The Western Army was also ordered to speed up the cleanup of the battlefield. At the most crucial moment, the human race displayed extraordinary courage and decisiveness, especially the experts. The Prince of Xiang had bravely gone to battle to make up for his mistake on Mount Nuoralang, but he was once more heavily injured. Xiao Zhang also appeared. The kite could fly over Mount Yanji, but it could not fly over the city walls and once more disappeared. Liang Wangsun finally appeared on the battlefield, his golden lotus blooming in front of Shuilao City. In the end, He was heavily injured and unconscious, so he was carried back to Xuanyang City. Liang Banhu had died in battle, Liang Hongzhuang had died in battle, and Liang Wangsun had been heavily injured. In this war against the demons, the Liang clan of the previous dynasty had disregarded their grudge with the Chun imperial dynasty and performed heroically. If Liang Xiaoxiao, who had colluded with the demons back then, were still alive and seeing this sight, what would he think? The solemn and stirring actions of the human experts and the mobilization of Divine General He Ming's troops somewhat alleviated the oppressive atmosphere brought about by this first snowfall. But as the snow continued to fall and the siege weapons were sent back in vain, the morale of the human army continued to drop. Just when Chun Chongsheng and Su Yorong were prepared to act, something happened. To put it more accurately, a carriage had arrived outside Xuelao City. This carriage was not a carriage, an ox cart, or a mule cart. It was not pulled by any animal, but it could still move forward on its own. This was rather mystical. The wheels crunched as they rolled over the snow and mud. It seemed slow, but they soon arrived at the barracks from the south. What was even more miraculous was that the long journey from the south to this place was tens of thousands of miles long. Who knew how many wounded soldiers and fierce bandits they had encountered along the way, but this carriage was actually able to come out unscathed without the protection of a single cavalry. Countless gazes fell on the car. The curtain of the carriage was lifted and a young Taoist stuck his head out. When he saw the tens of thousands of people on the plains, he covered his mouth in shock and quickly retracted his head. In a very short period of time, it was enough for many people to see clearly that the little Taoist was very good-looking. His skin was like jade, his eyes were like dots of paint, and he was full of spiritual qi. "Am I stupid?" Chun Chongsheng retracted his gaze and looked at Su Yurong. He hesitated for a while and said, "Also, it's not that nice?" Su Yorong knew what he was thinking and said, "You were prettier than him when you were young." Chun Chongsheng said, "When we were young, we only wrote letters, but we never met." Su Yorong said, "This is what Lord Crane said." The cry of a crane came from the sky. The white crane was the witness. The small carriage stopped on a small mountain outside the battlefield. The curtain was lifted once more, and then it was hung up with a wooden hook. The young Taoist jumped onto the ground and helped the person in the carriage out. Countless gazes followed the movements of the small carriage, moving from the plains of the south to this small mountain. Even the cursing of the tribal warriors outside Xuelao City had stopped. When they saw that young Taoist boy carved from jade, many people had already guessed at who was in the carriage. Just because it had secluded itself from the world for 10 years did not mean that the people of the world did not know what was going on in the monastery of Eternal Spring. Many people knew that a young Taoist boy had appeared in the monastery. As for whether or not that pair of master and disciple were venting their anger, who knew? Shang Xingzhou still came. Just when the morale of the human race was at its lowest, at the most crucial and dangerous moment of this war, after several hundred years, he once more came to Xuelao City. Many people, including himself, had already guessed that this would be his last visit to Xuelao City. Other than the injured Prince of Xiang, all the important figures of the army went to the small mountain to pay their respects. In the plains outside Xuelao City, dust was constantly rising from the small mountain. After living in seclusion in Luoyang for 10 years, Shang Xingzhou's reputation had not diminished, perhaps even increased. As he gazed at the dust rising from the plains, the worry on Linghai Jiwang's face gradually deepened. He turned to Chun Chongsheng, wanting to say a few words of advice, but he knew that now was not the right time. Archbishop Enlin had returned from the most dangerous front lines, bringing back Guan Bai's body. The hundreds of thousands of demon warriors outside Xuelao City had come from the various tribes. They could not obtain the complete trust of the imperial clan, but they truly did possess terrifying killing power on the battlefield. Chun Chongsheng sat at Guan Bai's side for a very long time. During the all-school martial exhibition, Guan Bai had glanced at him from the side of the street. This was their first meeting. And then Wuqiong Bai had entered the capital and tortured the stray dogs to death. And then Guan Bai had lost an arm. Because of this matter, no matter what Bi Hong said, no matter how miserable Wuqiong Bai ended up, Chen Chongqing had never forgiven her. He felt that a person like Guan Bai was worthy of even more respect and had a better ending. He had not expected it to be like this in the end, nothing more. "Where's Liang Banhu?" Chen Chongqing asked Archbishop Enlin. He remembered it very clearly. Because they had been the first to arrive at Xuelao City, the North Third Camp of the Eastern Army had always been a thorn in the side of the demon armies. There were many times when they had almost been surrounded. On a certain night a few days ago, some major demon tribes had launched a joint counterattack, their target the North Third Camp. The battle that night had been rather bitter. Guan Bai had led 1,000 orthodoxy cavalry to reinforce the enemy, and only at the final juncture was the danger averted. But Guan Bai had died in battle, and Liang Banhu, one of the first 3 cavalrymen to arrive at Xuelao City, had also died in battle. Liang Banhu chose to self-detonate. Archbishop Enlin recalled the bitter battlefield, a sorrowful expression on her face. She hesitated for a while before saying to Chen Chongqing, "I don't know if it was because he wanted to atone for his brother's crimes, but I heard that he was especially valiant on the battlefield." Chen Chongqing fell silent. He didn't know what he should say at this moment. Archbishop Enlin added, "Guan Fei Bai's mood is somewhat unstable. We have to think of a way to have him retreat." Chen Chongqing said, "You and Yorong go discuss it." Enlin received the order and left. Ling Haijiwang asked, "Shouldn't we go over there and take a look?" Over there naturally referred to that small mountain, the mountain Shang Xingzhou was on. Up until now, Chen Chongqing had not gone over, nor had Ling Haijiwang and the other priests of the Li Palace. In truth, there were already many priests constantly looking over. Chen Chongqing was the pope and had an esteemed status, but he was still a student. If they did not go and pay their respects, it would be rather inexcusable. "There's no need." Chen Chongqing pulled up the white cloth and covered Guan Bai's face. He brought Ling Haijiwang out of the tent and gazed at the distant small mountain. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. Just like this, Chen Chongqing was still in his own tent. Shang Xingzhou was still in his carriage. Teacher and student were separated by 100-some li, both silent. Occasionally, Chen Chongqing would glance in that direction. But Shang Xingzhou kept his eyes closed the entire time, allowing the not-so-warm demon sun to shine on his face, as if he wanted to iron out some of the wrinkles on his face. Everyone, including the demons in Xuelao City, wanted to know what Shang Xingzhou would do next. It could be assumed that he would not just sit in a small carriage and watch the battle. On the morning of the next day, the crowd finally saw what Shang Xingzhou had done. He had hung a painting in the sky. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Starting Point. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile phone users, please go to M. Chapter 109. A kite was drifting in the sky. In a remote corner, Wang Po wiped the mud from his face and squinted at the small mountain. He naturally recognized it as Xiao Zhang's kite. Hadn't that kite been smashed on the walls of Xuelao City a few days ago? A person had been tied to that kite before, but today it was tied to a painting. This painting was enormous, 10-some zhang wide and tall. It gently swayed in the wind like a wave of wheat, but the scenery on the canvas was unaffected and extremely clear. Upon seeing this painting, the unfocused eyes of Divine General Fei Dian, who had just been revived by a cinnabar pill, gradually began to focus and sharpen. 3 elders of a grain convoy on the plains of the south narrowed their eyes at the same time as they recalled the past. On the walls of Xuelao City, in the shadows of the hall, Black Robe's hands were hidden in her sleeves, a mocking smile on her lips. They had all seen the scenery in the painting. that extremely beautiful Sangarama temple that could not exist in the mortal world. The legacy of the Buddhist sect had been severed for countless years. The incense burning in Sangarama temple had lasted for a very long time. Until 1,000 years ago, it was finally destroyed in the fires of war. The demons invaded and Luoyang was besieged for 3 months. Only 3 out of 10 people in the city survived, and the common people suffered grievous casualties. A total of 60 million people were killed. Countless treasures of civilization like Sangarama Temple had been destroyed. As the saying goes, romance is all lost in a single torch. This painting depicted the burning of Sangarama Temple. Very few people had seen Sangarama Temple with their own eyes, but many people had seen pictures of Sangarama Temple in books, and many people knew of its story. As for the siege of Luoyang, it was a humiliation and misery that no human could ever forget. The huge painting hanging in the sky was very well drawn. It was vivid and lifelike, as if it was real. As they looked at the raging flames in the painting, the soldiers felt like they could hear the painful creaking of a building on the verge of collapse. The faces of many people in the painting were pained, twisted, confused, numb. In the end, these people had all died in that fire. Upon seeing this painting, the soldiers on the front lines once more understood a simple principle. This was history. This was the source of anger. This was why they had appeared in front of Xuelao City. As that painting and the information contained in it spread throughout the barracks, a conjecture also spread at the same time. It was said that Art Saint Wu Daozi painted murals in Sangarama Temple all year round. Could this one have been painted by him? Now the entire continent knew that Taoist Wu was not dead, and that he was traveling the world with a certain someone. If Taoist Wu was here, did that mean that person was here as well? Thinking that a legendary figure like Wang Jitsa might show up at the front line at any time, the morale of the human army was boosted. In contrast, the morale of the demon race had suddenly plummeted, and the degree of improvement was even more exaggerated than on the human race side. To the human armies, Shang Xingzhou and Wang Jitsa had about the same influence. To the demons, it was completely different. They might not know who the current human emperor was, nor did they know Chen Chongsheng. They might not know that Shang Xingzhou was the teacher of the human emperor and Chen Chongsheng, but they definitely knew who Wang Jitsa was. At dusk, the setting sun dyed Xuelao City in the west red. Half of the city seemed to be on the verge of burning. Suddenly, countless fanatical shouts rang out from the plains below and above the city walls. These shouts sounded like Guluan Mu. Many human soldiers could understand a few simple demon words, and they would never forget the meaning of this word. When the demon soldiers madly attacked, wanting to trade their lives for their own, when they were surrounded on a mountain and finally committed suicide, they would all shout this word. This word meant Divine Emperor. The Demon Lord had finally appeared. Chen Chongsheng took the monocle from Linghai Jiwang's hands and gazed up at Xuelao City. The air today was especially clean, and the light of the setting sun did not affect his vision, allowing him to just barely make out the scene on the walls. Although it was rather blurry, Chen Chongsheng still recognized that face he had not seen in many years. Compared to when he was in White Emperor City, the Demon Lord was much more composed, his expression even more dignified. When he saw the beard the Demon Lord had deliberately grown, Chen Chongsheng thought of Tang 36, and then he saw the Demon Lord's demon horns. Logically speaking, the Demon Lord, as a member of the Imperial clan, should not have demon horns, but he had made 2, and he had even decorated them to make them seem especially exaggerated. It was obvious that this was a method to win the affection of the middle and lower-class demons. Shang Xingzhou had arrived. The Demon Lord had appeared. This meant that the final battle was about to begin. To the demons, bitterly defending Xuelao City until winter came was naturally the best method. But they had no way of resolving the problem of provisions. This was exactly the same situation that Luoyang had faced. Even if they massacred the people and did their best to reduce the non-military population, they still had no way of resolving the rations for the hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors outside the city. Moreover, the human armies would not leave behind any of the bodies of their comrades. Time, place, and people were at peace. It seemed that the demons had the geographical advantage, while the humans had the human advantage. As for the time, the recent snowfall seemed to indicate that the heavenly Tao favored the demons, but the time for the final battle was decided by the humans. So who would obtain the final victory in this war? It was another early morning. The plains outside Shualao City were so quiet that it seemed like it had not awoken. The sound of a horn suddenly rang out. Thus, the entire world awoke. All life in this world had been waiting for this moment. Perhaps no one had truly been able to sleep last night. The wolf cavalry, the main force of the demon race, fiercely attacked the human eastern army. The black soil of the plains was thrown into the air and rained down. The sounds of weapons clashing, grunts, and wretched howls could be heard everywhere, as well as the sounds of arrays being activated. The Eastern Army arduously withstood the tidal wave of attacks from the demons, finally obtaining a rare period of free time in the afternoon. The main camp issued an urgent order to the front lines, requesting that the troops at the very front retreat as quickly as possible and rotate with the reserve cavalry. Arrows danced through the air, suppressing the enemy pikemen and providing cover for their own side. All the processes were proceeding in an orderly manner, but there was a problem somewhere. The North Third Camp, which had been at the very front since the start of the battle, refused to retreat. Because Guan Feibai refused to listen to military orders. He was not the commander of the North Third Camp, but he was a disciple of the Mountly Sword sect, the strongest member of the army. Back then, he and his two junior brothers had risked their lives to charge up the cliff and were the first to reach Shualao City. The entire North Third Camp now only listened to Guan Feibai. Guan Feibai was not willing to retreat for a very simple reason. His junior brother Liang Banhu had died, and Guan Bai had also died to save them. His eyes were already red from the slaughter. At the most tense moment, accompanied by the cry of a crane, Su Yurong arrived at the scene. Guan Feibai gripped his sword and narrowed his eyes at her. His voice was hoarse and low to the extreme, like that of a wild beast that had not drunk water for many days. "Junior sister, don't try to persuade me." His narrowed eyes were a sea of blood. Su Yorong knew that while he seemed rational and spoke in an orderly manner, he had already gone mad and could not be persuaded. "I remember that senior brother Qiushan should have prepared a silk bag for all of you." Su Yorong looked into his eyes and said, "You should open it and take a look. Mother will begin her next course of chemotherapy tomorrow. I hope that everything goes smoothly. I will definitely have less time to write in the coming period, but there's no need to worry. I've already accumulated a few manuscripts in the last 10 days. I will do my best to constantly update them, and it seems that I should be able to do so. Thank you, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Chidian, to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 110. Guan Feibai's body trembled slightly. When they left Mountly, eldest brother had prepared a silk pouch for each of them, saying that they could only open it at the most crucial moment. A few days ago, when the North Third Camp had fallen into a tight encirclement and the Orthodoxy cavalry had yet to send reinforcements, he noticed that Liang Banhu had opened the letter and was reading it by the bonfire for a long time. The next day, Liang Banhu died in battle. Was it his turn today? He took out the brocade pouch and opened it. There was a letter and a pill inside. In the letter, Qiushan Jun said that this pill was the same pill that Xiao Zhang wanted to use to help him break through to the next level, but in the end, it caused him to go mad. After eating this pill, there was a small chance that it could greatly increase one's cultivation, and even break through to the next realm. However, there was a higher chance that one's meridians would be completely severed. If it was less severe, like Xiao Zhang, they would need to spend more than 10 years of hard work to recover. If it was more severe, they would die on the spot. Bai Kai did not see the contents of the letter, but seeing the change in Guan Feibai's expression, he vaguely guessed at something and desperately tried to dissuade him. Guan Feibai expressionlessly held the pill, completely ignoring what he was saying. Bai Kai turned to Su Yorong and sobbed, "Why must you remind him of this matter? How can you blame junior sister for this? In the end, it's our own choice." Guan Feibai's expression was very calm. After saying this, he swallowed the pill into his stomach. In the next moment, he fell asleep. "It's a knockout drug. Senior asked me to find Chen Chongqing to concoct it," Su Yorong said to Bai Kai. Liang Banhu also had one in his silk pouch, but I don't know why he didn't eat it. Is it because the contents of the letter are different? Seeing his senior brother being carried away like a drunkard, Bai Kai subconsciously rubbed his head and said, "I still haven't opened the letter, so I don't know if it's the same." Su Yorong reached out her hand to stroke his head and said softly, "Then come with me." Only then did Bai Kai realize that she had been trying to get information out of him. The ones attacking the Eastern Army were truly the main force of the demons. Other than the 10,000 wolf cavalry, there were also several times that number of soldiers from the various tribes. The most important evidence was that the commander of this demon army was the demon marshal. Separated by Tensum Li, one could clearly see the massive figure of the mountain-toppling fiend. The previous mountain-toppling fiend had died in Nuoralang, but the demon commander had somehow managed to find another one. Wang Pa hugged his blade with one arm as he sat in a swamp, leaning against a tree that had been dead for many years. His eyes were closed, and he paid no attention to the sounds of fighting and death outside the mist. His injuries were far from recovering. If he wanted to block the demon commander, he had to cherish every ounce of strength he had. The reason why the demons would abandon the central camp and attack the Eastern Army was actually very simple, and anyone could understand it. Because everyone could see the small mountain on the outskirts of the battlefield. There was a car on the mountain. There was a little Taoist in the car. The little Taoist was flying a kite. Below the kite was a gigantic painting. It was a painting of the Sangarama temple burning. The wolf cavalry surged forward like a tide, but when they were still several li from the small mountain, they were blocked by the black-armored cavalry. The war was carried out abnormally directly and crudely. Both sides' strategic intentions were very obvious, so naturally, there weren't many tactics to speak of. The entire wilderness seemed to be able to feel the tremors coming from the east and hear the sounds of fighting. I don't know if that side can still hold out, but I know that I won't be able to hold out much longer. Ling Haijiwang rarely used such a human tone to converse with Chen Chongqing. This was because he truly was under enormous pressure. The moment he walked out of his tent, countless gazes would be directed at him. These gazes were questioning, uneasy, disdainful, encouraging. They were incomparably complex and extremely sinister. The main force of the demons was attacking the Eastern Army, and that small mountain could be submerged by the black tide at any moment. At a time like this, everyone wanted to know what the Pope's stance was. The vast majority of priests and soldiers hoped that he would issue an order as soon as possible for the army to go to the rescue. Yes, not even Divine General He Ming had the right to issue such an order. Only Chen Chongqing himself could issue it. If there is no news from that side, we won't move. Chen Chongqing said. Tomorrow was the time to refine the cinnabar pill. He was considering whether he should cancel this batch of pills and save his energy for the upcoming decisive battle. Because the cinnabar pill had not saved the people he wanted to save. The battlefield was the place where one matured the fastest. Guan Bai's hand was ice-cold. His heart would not lose its warmth, but it would still be much stronger than usual. After a moment of hesitation, Ling Haijiwang asked, "Is there a possibility that it is inconvenient for the other side to speak?" For a master to ask his student for help in the end, especially for this pair of master and disciple, who the entire world knew had a strange relationship, truly was a very difficult matter. If this really was the case, and Chen Chongqing did not go to the rescue, what if something really did happen? Shang Xingzhou was a saint with an unfathomably deep cultivation, but he was still old, his body weak. According to the news from Luoyang, he had aged a great deal in the last few years. Nothing could happen to Shang Xingzhou, because he was the spiritual leader of the human race. No matter how much they disliked him, they had to accept this fact. When he thought of the scene by the hot spring, the tightly bound black hair, and the white hair that could no longer be completely covered, Chen Chongqing fell quiet for a while. In the end, he just waved his hand. As the battle continued, the pressure from all sides grew more and more real. The gazes turned into letters from the Red Falcons, and some divine generals even attempted to break into the camp to seek an audience with Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing received these divine generals, but he did not agree to their request. Su Yorong said, "The situation over there truly is rather grim. The North Third Camp will not move, but the Fourth Camp might have to go up." Chen Chongqing replied, "I know." Su Yorong said, "The pressure will only get greater and greater." Chen Chongqing gazed at the dust rising from the distant plains and mountains. After a moment of silence, he said, "When I was young in Xining, when the pressure came, it was always senior brother who blocked it for me. When I went to the capital, there was Marshal Uncle and Archbishop Mei Lisha, and later on, there was you. But in truth, my ability to endure pressure isn't bad." From the age of 10, he had begun to face the shadow of death. No one could endure pressure better than him. He continued, "The battle started too early. There's a problem. Yes, no matter how few provisions Xuelao City had, they should have been able to hold on for a little longer, at least until the weather got a little colder." Su Yorong also believed this. "What do you think? Master didn't ask me to help, which means that he doesn't need my help. I don't know what he's planning, and my abilities in this aspect are rather weak, so I can only cooperate as usual." Chen Chongqing looked at her and said, "Just like that time in White Emperor City, when you and Master planned everything, I just followed along." Su Yorong thought this over and realized that he was right. In essence, she, Shang Xingzhou, and the Divine Empress were the same kind of person, while Chen Chongqing was a different kind of person. The survival of the human race required the former, but the latter was the goal. Perhaps this was why she liked him so much? "I like you." Su Yorong looked into his eyes and very seriously said this. Such a sudden confession had truly caught one off guard. Crucially, there were still many people around, and there were also people in the tent. Their conversation just now had not been intentionally hidden from anyone. Linghai Jiwang carefully wiped the magical artifact in his hand, as if he had not heard a thing. Divine General He Ming's hand that was lifting the curtain froze in midair, just like the smile on his face. And Hua gazed at Su Yorong with stars in her eyes, feeling that the holy maiden was truly too extraordinary. This sort of scene could only occasionally appear, a lucky little flower blooming amidst blood and fire. The main theme of the battlefield was naturally war. Battles were happening everywhere, chaotic and bloody. To the south of Xuelao City, in the plains with a circumference of several hundred li, these battles were constantly taking place. The soil here was brimming with humus, so black that it was intoxicating and rich to the extreme. Even if blood fell on it, it would not be particularly striking. But as the snow fell over the last few days, the plains were first painted in a layer of white, and then the red and green blood that greeted it made the scene even more ghastly. Even the most radical of artists in Xuelao City would find it impossible to imagine such a combination of colors, such a clash of brush stroke. Feints, restraints, suppression, separation, encirclement, a tide-like push. After all these little tricks had been used up, the situation was still as clear as it had been at the start. The most tense and bitter battle was still taking place between the demon commander's wolf cavalry and the left army. The demon wolf cavalry and black-armored cavalry collided, tearing at each other and devouring each other. It was like the place where the river met the ocean. Waters of different colors constantly collided, stirring up massive waves that swirled into a vortex that could swallow up the entire sky. At the center of this vortex was that unremarkable small mountain. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Qidien, to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 111. The string of the kite had already been tied to the shafts of the carriage and floated in the air. The young Taoist boy did not dare to look at the bitter battle around him. He used his two small hands to cover his face, and when he occasionally stole a glance, his body would tremble in fear. The curtain of the carriage had already been lifted. Shang Xingzhou sat on the side of the carriage, his feet on the ground. If Chen Chongsheng were here, he would realize that he truly was much older than he had been in Luoyang, his hair completely white. He gripped a fan in his hand and slowly waved it, his white hair drifting in the wind. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of fighting and blood splashing in the air. He did not feel any disgust, nor did he become intoxicated. He was very calm. Before the true end, everything he did and the people he met were just a journey. He was well aware why the demons were using all their strength to kill him. He naturally would not leave. What he wanted was to attract the demons' main force while also providing them with some sort of evidence. This was a great fog that both sides needed. He also would not send any information to the Central Army camp. The more silent the Central Army camp became, the more the demons wanted to kill him. In these circumstances, if he were to die to the demons, many soldiers and priests would have a strong opinion of Chen Chongsheng and Su Yorong, and the human armies on the front lines might even split. He knew that Chen Chongsheng would be under enormous pressure, but he did not care. If he could not even endure this little pressure, what right did he have to be his student? After fighting from early morning until the autumn sun was high in the sky, the vanguard of the wolf cavalry finally broke through the heavy defenses of the black-armored cavalry and reached the small mountain. Yet those drooling and panting wolves were not even able to take a single step onto the small mountain before they were shot to death by several thousand sacred light crossbows. In a situation where the number of sacred light crossbows was dwindling, such a large volley was already a very rare sight on the battlefield. It could only be said that both Peng Shihai and the other officers and soldiers of the Eastern Army regarded Shang Xingzhou's safety with even greater importance than the heavens. The small mountain was surrounded by corpses and wounded. The human cavalry that had once more surrounded the small mountain conducted a simple cleanup. If they encountered a wounded demon soldier, they would naturally finish him off. If they encountered an injured comrade, they would be carried up the mountain and temporarily placed on the slope. Once the battle was over, the Li Palace clergy and the teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green would come to treat them. They could only hope that the wounded would still be alive. The soldiers placed the wounded on the hillside, said a few words of comfort, and then left. Of course, before they left, they would not forget to kowtow to the car a few times. The little Taoist separated his fingers and revealed his dark eyes as he looked at Shang Xingzhou. Without opening his eyes, Shang Xingzhou said, "If you can't cure it, don't bother me." The little Taoist happily grunted and took out 2 straw ropes from his sleeves. He tied his wide sleeves tightly around his wrists and ran up the hillside. The slope was full of wounded soldiers, so naturally, no one stopped him. However, he did not bring the medical kit, so he did not know how to treat it. In the next moment, the little Taoist removed the golden needles from his fingers and started to apply the needles to stop the bleeding of those wounded soldiers. The expression on his little face was incomparably serious. He moved from one wounded soldier to another. His little face was red from the heat, and his forehead was covered in sweat. One of the wounded soldiers was wearing a felt hat that was not commonly seen on the battlefield. It covered most of his face, and the part that was exposed was faintly green. Looking at the wounded soldier, the little Taoist scratched his head and said, "Poisoned? I don't know how to treat it." Having said this, he had no choice but to temporarily give up on that wounded soldier and first stop the bleeding of the other wounded soldiers. After doing these things, he returned to the front of the carriage and looked at Shang Xingzhou with a sweet smile. In a crisp voice, he shouted, "Old ancestor, I've returned." In the next moment, the smile on the little Taoist's face turned into one that was on the verge of tears. It was obvious that he was extremely nervous as he silently said a few words. At some unknown time, Shang Xingzhou had already opened his eyes. He calmly nodded his head. The little Taoist nimbly squeezed into the carriage and hid behind him. Shang Xingzhou looked at those wounded soldiers on the hillside. His gaze followed the finger of the little Taoist on his shoulder and finally fell on the body of a wounded soldier. It was the wounded soldier wearing the felt hat and had a somewhat green complexion. Shang Xingzhou calmly looked at that wounded soldier. A shallow wrinkle gradually appeared at the corner of his eye. Gently blown by the wind, it became deeper and deeper. Suddenly, an extremely bright light appeared in his eyes. Several dozen zhang away, a crack in space noiselessly appeared at the throat of that wounded soldier. Spatial cracks were the sharpest existences in the world and could directly lead to the netherworld. Beads of blood appeared on the green skin and were slowly sliced apart. The wounded soldier suddenly opened his eyes, his body sinking into the ground like a sugar figurine in water. The spatial crack sank into the ground with it. The wounded soldier's body transformed into a cloud of smoke that seeped out of the earth and spread throughout the hillside. Shang Xingzhou suddenly closed his eyes. The massive painting hanging in the sky by the kite was of Sangarama Temple burning. Suddenly, a young Taoist priest appeared in the blazing ruins. This Taoist priest had a handsome appearance, just like Shang Xingzhou when he was young. He looked around at the plains, his eyes so sharp that they seemed to be able to see all ghosts. In the painting, some bright lights appeared in the clean eyes of the young Taoist priest. In the carriage, some deep wrinkles appeared on Shang Xingzhou's face. Swish, 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 swish. Sharp sounds of cutting could be heard all around the small hill. The spatial crack gradually faded away. Black Robe's figure appeared. The clothes of the human cavalry had long ago been reduced to shreds and scattered away in the wind. The black robe that had protected him for 1,000 years had also been torn in several places. Bright red blood flowed out from some of the wounds. The legend was true. Black Robe really was a human. I didn't expect that I would be successfully ambushed by you. Black Robe looked at Shang Xingzhou in the carriage. His voice pierced through the hood. It was rather deep and sinister, but at this moment it was tinged with emotion. Just as he had said, he had taken an enormous risk today, pretending to be a human cavalry and arriving in front of Shang Xingzhou in order to ambush and kill him. He had not expected Shang Xingzhou to see through his disguise and almost kill him with a sneak attack. Back then, your student used this move to kill my student, and now you're using it again. This repetition is truly disappointing. Shang Xingzhou's voice was devoid of emotion. It was so cold that it seemed like this person was not the demon military advisor or an old friend. He was naturally speaking of 10 years ago, when the young demon lord had disguised himself as a heavily injured array master and had Chun Chou and An Hua of the Mount Song Army headquarters carry him to the snowy mountains to find the master of the cinnabar pill. Black Robe replied, "At the time, the person your majesty wanted to kill was Emperor Xian. It had nothing to do with Chen Chongsheng." Shang Xingzhou replied, "No matter what, it's still an old trick, or else it wouldn't have failed to deceive even a student like me." The young Taoist boy intently listened from behind him, completely unaware of how important these words were to him. In the last 2 years, Many people had learned that a young Taoist boy had appeared in the Monastery of Eternal Spring in Luoyang, and they had paid great attention to the attendants around Shang Xingzhou. But Shang Xingzhou had never clearly explained just who this young Taoist boy was to him. Until today, when he said these words in front of Black Robe. Just what were the benefits of being Shang Xingzhou's student? One only needed to know that of the two students he had taken before him, one had become emperor and the other the pope. That was enough. Even Black Robe couldn't help but glance at the young Taoist boy. Although his plan today was nothing new, it actually had a very high chance of success. Who could have expected that a child would see through it? This was probably the meaning behind the phrase, profound fortune. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Starting Point. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 112. You want to lock down my chi and soul and kill me in one blow? A very good idea. Alas, you didn't succeed because you're already old. Black Robe walked up to the small carriage. The cold wind blew through the holes in her black clothes, making them look like the war banners of the netherworld. Shang Xingzhou's eyes remained indifferent at this sight, but the young Taoist boy hiding behind him began to tremble in fear, his small face pale and his body trembling. The human cavalry around him had not sensed what was happening on the small mountain. It was obvious that Black Robe had used some sort of trick. The battle on the plains continued, and it was even more intense. The mountain-toppling fiend seemed to be getting closer. The second demon general suddenly led the tribal leaders and experts in an attack on the central army tent. Outside Shuilao City, the sounds of fighting rang out, and all of this was to conceal the killing intent on the small mountain. Shang Xingzhou indifferently said, I truly am very old, because I'm not like you. For the sake of living a few more years, you actually used such a disgusting method on your body. The once number one beauty in the world has become like this, neither human nor ghost. In the future, when you die, will you still have the nerve to meet that brother of yours? Shut your mouth. Black Robe's voice became shrill, echoing over the small mountain like a needle. In an instant, many small holes appeared on the painting in the sky. You people don't have the right to mention his name. Black Robe angrily shrieked. In the next moment, he calmed down. The entire process was abrupt and bizarre. His face, which was not covered by the hood, was green. Coupled with the faint smile that gradually appeared on his face, it was all the more bizarre. I will kill you, and then I will have my brother kill you again in the netherworld, kill you countless times. Shang Xingzhou's expression remained calm as he said, You first have to be able to kill me. After saying this, he suddenly started coughing. He coughed so hard that his straight back gradually bent like an old pine tree. The young Taoist boy supported his arm and constantly stroked his back. His eyes were moist as he called out in his childish voice, Ancestor, is Ancestor okay? Shang Xingzhou straightened his body with some difficulty and waved his hand. Look at your pitiful face covered in wrinkles and your head full of white hair. How can you possibly be a match for me? Black Robe looked at him and said, So, die. The words, go to hell, could only be heard in the marketplace. Moreover, the people who said these words were usually shrews, and they carried some kind of curse. However, Black Robe said these three words very calmly and elegantly, because he did not mean to curse. He was merely stating a fact that was about to happen. His calmness hid some admiration that could not be expressed verbally, or perhaps it could be said that they appreciated each other's talent. After all, in the past 1,000 years of history, he and Shang Xingzhou should be the two most outstanding schemers. It was a pity that the final realization of any conspiracy still relied on force. Victory or defeat still depended on life and death. It seemed to be a little lacking in beauty. Black Robe disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the car. There was no link between the two images, as if they were two independent events. The mountain top was silent. The grass sank slightly, revealing a few clear footprints. The afterimage of the black robe was like the tip of a giant pen against the greenish-yellow background. The ink was very full, as if it was about to draw a painting or a scroll of cursive calligraphy. This brush did not fall on the giant painting in the air, but on the car. Black robe's thin and wizened finger, suffused with a faint green glow, stabbed at Shang Xingzhou's throat. A hint of regret appeared in Shang Xingzhou's eyes. As was said before, he and Black Robe were the two most outstanding schemers in the world. In truth, he also very much wanted to exchange blows with Black Robe. Alas, he truly was old. In the last tens of thousands of years, he was the only one who had succeeded in cultivating the canon of flowing west, and he understood the majestic power of time better than anyone else. Every night in the last 10 years, he had sensed the passing of his life and the dissolving of his soul. He was a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy and was not willing to use evil techniques to prolong his life like Black Robe, and his strength was also inferior. Just now, he had failed to lock down Black Robe's chi and soul, so now he could only wait for Black Robe to kill him. He was very regretful that he had not been able to fight with Black Robe at his peak. He did not need to fight to his heart's content, but rather to use all sorts of strange schemes, to fight to the extreme. Besides this, he had no regret. Like death? He had driven the car up the mountain precisely to lure the demons to kill him. Luring out Black Robe was already the best result he could think of. There was a small stream outside Xining Village's old temple, and there were many fish in the stream. Yuan and Chen Chongqing liked to watch the fish play by the stream, but his favorite activity was fishing. Whether it was koi or red thread, whether they were big or small, whether they were steamed or braised, they were all delicious. He was the world's most extraordinary old fisherman. Today, he had become the bait, so who could escape? The autumn sun was high in the sky, the brightest moment of the day. Black Robe's mood was as bright and beautiful as the sun. The brighter the surroundings, the darker the carriage seemed. His hand was still 2 feet away from Shang Xingzhou. He saw the regret in Shang Xingzhou's eyes, and he also saw the young Taoist boy's terrified eyes. But in the next moment, he saw a speck of white appear in the dark carriage. Just what was that ghastly, pale white thing? It was not the face of a ghost demanding one's life, but a piece of white paper? Soon after, a biting cold light pierced through the darkness and slashed at Black Robe. It was incomparably bright, like someone had lit up a sun in the carriage. It was so cold that the grass on the slope was instantly covered in a thin layer of frost. What sort of light could simultaneously possess these two completely different chis? 10 some li away, in a swamp, Wang Po leaned against a withered tree, staring at the nearby mountain-toppling fiend, his expression extremely focused. Suddenly, he sensed something and turned his head to look at the small mountain. At almost the same time, the mountain-toppling fiend also turned in that direction. The demon commander's cold gaze suddenly became feverish, and then it rapidly cooled, filled with worry. The second demon general and the tribal leaders and experts attacking the central army tent also sensed the appearance of a powerful qi. Chen Chongqing and a few divine generals also sensed this qi. Su Yorong's perception was the clearest and most accurate, because she was the most familiar with this qi. When she was young, she had been very bored in the imperial palace, so she would often go play with that spear. Black Robe howled as he retreated with unimaginable speed. Snow clung to his eyelashes, and everything he saw was suffused with a rainbow light, including that spear that had pierced through the darkness. There was a soft squelch. Black Robe landed on the grass, several dozen zhang away. A hole had appeared in the right side of his chest. Blood gushed out of it. It was an abnormally terrifying sight. Golden specks of light drifted out of the bloody hole, making it seem like a setting sun. "Why is this spear in your hand?" Black Robe looked at the carriage on the summit and angrily said, "Why are you here?" A breeze rustled the white paper. Xiao Zhang walked out of the carriage, a spear in his hand. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Chidien. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to